Chapter 214. At the Divine Dragon Empire's eastern shore, Calm Wind Pass was truly the most impregnable pass in the world. This was because the other passes would at most face groups of cavalry or countless siege weapons. What Calm Wind Pass had to face was the raging waves of the endless sea, as well as the extremely savage sea tribe, who were as numerous as sand in the sea. The Divine Dragon Empire had no choice but to go all out. Calm Wind Pass was hundreds of meters tall. It was connected to cliffs from east to west. The outer walls were as smooth as a mirror, without any protrusions. The strangest thing was that Calm Wind Pass did not have a city gate. Rather than calling it a pass, it was more like a city wall. However, the people of the world believed it to be the most impregnable pass in the world only because the Divine Dragon Empire had carved the words Calm Wind Pass on it. Calm Wind Pass was a sign of peace. Calm Wind Pass's garrison commander, Boros, reclined on a recliner, revealing his muscular upper body under the scorching sun. Boros grabbed the wine flask beside him and took a big gulp. Then, he let out a long sigh. It sounded exceptionally comfortable. However, in his right eye, there was a haze called worry that didn't disperse for a long time. Boros gently moved his palm as if he was caressing the wind. The hot and humid sea breeze passed through his palm, telling him a clear message: summer was here. The tide was about to rise. General. A soldier ran over to Boros and quickly performed a cupped fist salute. General, the king's orders have arrived. Boros glanced at that soldier indifferently. The soldier looked like he had been pricked. He quickly lowered his head and muttered to himself. His general's face was simply too scary. Even though he had been at Calm Wind Pass for a long time, he still could not get used to it. Boros's face originally looked very manly. He had a squarish face and regular facial features. After being stationed at Calm Wind Pass for so long and being exposed to the scorching sun, his complexion turned dark, making him look very righteous. Coupled with his muscular body and his status as a general, under normal circumstances, he would be a proper femme fatale. That was if he did not have the two scars running through his face. The two scars extended from the right side of Botha's forehead all the way to his left chin. Botha's entire face was ruined. No one knew why Boros insisted on not wearing an eye patch when his right eye was already gone. Why didn't he think of wearing a mask when half of his nose was gone? Why did he refuse the treatment of the Church of Light when he could no longer open half of his mouth? Some people guessed that Bao wanted to use his face to establish his prestige in the army. It was indeed not without reason, because all the soldiers who saw his terrifying face kept quiet out of fear. Imperial order? Bowen paused for a moment. It's indeed time. Nien Nien. Ah. The soldier raised his head in shock and looked at Boros. This imperial decree of the Divine Dragon Empire was not a true decree. It did not go through the other ministers. In fact, it was a personal letter from the emperor to his trusted aide, or rather, a secret decree. Logically speaking, Bose should have hurriedly taken it and immediately checked if the sealing wax was intact. Then, he would have found a place where no one was around to secretly look at it. How could he let a little soldier read in public like this? Bose looked at the soldier and said, "My eyes aren't good. Help me read it." When the soldier saw Bao looking at him, he quickly lowered his head and trembled as he opened the sealing wax. He did not want to break the rules, but it was indeed inconvenient for the general. Furthermore, he had worked hard and performed a great service. Furthermore, he had already said so much. There was nothing he could do about it. Even if the Hero King was here, he would not blame him. The soldier comforted himself as he did something disgraceful, softly reading the emperor's personal letter. Beloved General Bao, how have you been? You have been guarding Calm Wind Pass for many years and rarely return. This king. Speak louder. My right ear isn't very good. Bao said with a smile. This smile nearly scared the soldier to tears. Although he had never heard of a general having an injured ear, the soldier still quickly read it out loud. This king misses you very much. I also miss you very often. However, the country is very important. The safety of the common people depends on you. This is very important and cannot be easily touched. Therefore, that's enough, Bao Si said with a wave of his hand. The soldier immediately heaved a sigh of relief and wiped the cold sweat off his forehead. Just tell me directly. How many dragon knights can His Majesty send over this year? Bao Si said. Oh. The soldier blinked his eyes and immediately began to quickly read through the letter. This matter concerned the rising tide, as well as the lives of all his brothers. At this time, he did not care about the rules. What? The soldier exclaimed as he suddenly raised his head to look at Bao Si. Then, he lowered his head and read the letter back and forth. It was as if he suspected that he had seen wrongly. How many? Bao Si asked again. General, 20, the soldier stammered as he handed the letter over with both hands. His meaning was that if the general did not believe him, he could read it himself. Of course, the general did not believe him. He did not believe that his soldier would dare to lie to him on this matter. Hearing this number, Bao Si, who had been as unmoving as a mountain, finally frowned his remaining thick eyebrow. A heavy pressure suddenly descended upon Kamwen Mountain Pass like a storm. It startled a flock of birds that were resting in the area. 20. Fuck. Moreover, His Majesty also said in the letter that Lady Flay might not come this year. Don't worry about this. I received a message from Lady Flay a few days ago. She will come. Moreover, she will bring people from the Red Dragon sect with her. Red Dragon sect? But hasn't the Empire recently? I don't care about this or that. No matter who it is, as long as he is a human, as long as he can come to Kamwen Pass and resist the rising tide with us, he is my brother. During the rising tide, humans should be united. No matter what, wait until the tide recedes and we leave Kamwen Pass. Anyone who enters Kamwen Pass can only die in the hands of the Water Tribe. I understand, General. Bao Si waved his hand and said, there are so few dragon knights this year. Moreover, His Majesty thinks that Lady Flay might not come. Thus, His Majesty will definitely give me an explanation. Otherwise, Kamwen Pass will not be able to resist. Hearing this, the soldier hurriedly picked up the letter and read it from the end. General is wise. It is indeed written. His Majesty said that he will transfer 2 armies to us. Moreover, he has already issued a mission for the Empire and the Adventurers Guild. When the time comes, there will be a large number of adventurers to help us. After saying this, the soldier nervously looked at Bao Si. He did not care about how terrifying Bao Si's face was. He did not know how much help His Majesty would bring to Kamwen Pass, but his instincts told him that it should not be too big. As expected, Bao Si lightly shook his head. General. The soldier called out. It is useless no matter how many armies come. Bao Si said, because our Kamwen Pass is not lacking in people. The soldiers of Kamwen Pass have always had a high status. As long as they can leave here alive, they will be looked upon favorably wherever they go. They will be seen as heroes. Thus, there are many people like you here. A young man who came to Kamwen Pass to join the army on a whim. The soldier lowered his head shyly, as if he was reminiscing about his unbearable past. But even if we are not lacking in people, it is always good to have more people at this time. Although the walls of Kamwen Pass are long, the top of the walls cannot hold more than 100,000 people. Then General, you mean, we will not be able to defend Kamwen Pass this year? Nonsense. Bao Si raised his hand and slapped the soldier. We will definitely be able to defend it. The problem is. At this point, Boris suddenly stopped talking. Then, a clear voice rang out, helping him to finish his sentence. The problem is how many more people will die, right? The soldier stood up and saluted the person who had come. That person was wearing a plain long gown and holding a folding fan. He did not have any extra accessories on him. But just by standing there casually, a sense of grace and nobility spontaneously arose. No matter how one looked at him, he was not an ordinary person. Mr. Li. Loudly, Bao also greeted him warmly, then casually waved his hand. That soldier immediately understood and ran away. Mr. Li looked at the back of that soldier and smiled at Bao. I did not expect that the mighty general of Calm Wind Pass, General Bao, would be able to converse with a small soldier for so long. You must be joking. Bao smiled and did not explain. General Bao, what's the situation this year? How many Dragon Knights can the Hero King send? Mr. Li asked. 20. 20? Mr. Li's brows pricked up. Usually, 30 Dragon Knights would barely be enough. Bao frowned and looked at Mr. Li curiously. Mr. Li, you have been at Calm Wind Pass for less than a year. Why? At this point, Bao suddenly stopped, because a gust of sea breeze suddenly slapped his face. Bao felt as though he had swallowed a gust of wind. Although it was not strong, it was very clear. The direction of the wind suddenly changed. Bao's eyes narrowed as he suddenly stood up. His calm temperament changed and became extremely sharp. Bao walked to the side of the city wall and held onto the battlements as he looked at the horizon. What's the matter? Mr. Li was also shocked by Bao's sudden change as he asked nervously. Mr. Li, have the items from your Middle Empire arrived? Bao asked. They have been prepared long ago. They are just waiting for General Bao's orders, Mr. Li said. Thank you very much, Bao said in a deep voice. That means... Mr. Li stared intently at Bao. Look. Bao raised his hand and pointed. As Mr. Li spoke, he looked in the direction Bao was pointing. He saw a long silver line shining brightly as it suddenly appeared on the horizon. Mr. Li rubbed his eyes and took another look. There was clearly no such line just now. That is a monstrous wave, Bao said. His voice sounded like a war horn. It made Mr. Li feel agitated for no reason. Chapter 215. That's a wave? Mr. Li turned to look, his eyes filled with disbelief. The silver line that appeared on the horizon was clearly still very far from here. If that was a wave, and one that could be seen from here, how big would the wave be? Is it a high tide? Mr. Li turned to ask. Yes. Bao's eyes shone with a cold light as he shouted, alert. Dong! 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 As Bao's voice fell, the sound of war drums echoed throughout Calm Wind Pass. The powerful sound caused the ground to tremble. It was as if the drums were knocking on the hearts of all the soldiers. This was the highest alert of Calm Wind Pass. The atmosphere of the entire Pingfeng Mountain Pass suddenly changed, from tranquil to stormy. It was like a person taking a stroll by the river suddenly running. Countless soldiers quickly tidied up their armor and rushed up the city walls in an orderly manner. Huge energy cannons poked out from the city walls and set up in the middle of the city walls. The mouths of the cannons emitted a chilling aura. These were the weapons and mechanisms made by the dwarves. Quickly inform His Majesty and have the Dragon Knights come immediately, Bao said. Yes, General. Bring up all the things we've prepared and greet those beasts. Yes, General. Mr. Li? Don't worry, General. Mr. Li hurried down Calm Wind Pass after saying that. Although this had happened suddenly, the people in Calm Wind Pass did not panic at all. Instead, they seemed to be following the prescribed order and carrying out their duties casually. This was of course because the high tide would come every year. It was not a surprise at all. Moreover, they had prepared for this high tide for an entire year. The only unexpected thing was that the high tide this time came too quickly, much earlier than the previous years. As Bose thought, he kept his eyes on the silver thread. In this short period of time, the originally thin thread had become much thicker in his eyes. This meant that the huge wave was rushing towards him at an astonishing speed. If it were not for the fact that they had spent a lot of money to hire the dwarves to build this city wall, just this huge wave alone would have caused the humans to suffer heavy losses. He could now see the countless Xiao Hei dots on the white line. They were the flying fish tribe, and they could ride the waves to fly for a short period of time. It was the greatest threat to Calm Wind Pass. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew from behind Bose. Bose didn't even need to turn his head to know that his own Dragon Knight had been dispatched. 20 Dragon Knights lined up in a row and shot toward the flying fishmen like 20 arrows. For some reason, as long as there was a wyvern in the sky, no oceanic race dared to leave the water. The Flying Fish clan was no exception. Watching the black dots fall into the water, Boss nodded. It seemed that 20 Dragon Knights were barely enough. If the Flying Fish clan were allowed to fly close to the calm wind pass, it would be troublesome. Suddenly, a deafening noise rang out, followed by earth-shaking cheers. A shadow that blotted out the sky enveloped Boris. Bose raised his head and looked at him. His lips, which were only partially able to move, moved as if he was smiling. In the sky, 4 or 5 huge ships slowly flew past calm wind pass, bringing with them a suffocating aura. They hovered above the sea in front of calm wind pass. The Middle Empire's golden spaceships. 1 Dragon-grade spaceship, 4 Tiger-grade spaceships. Looking at those huge spaceships, Boris sighed with emotion. If the Hero King had any other means, he probably wouldn't have allowed the Middle Empire's spaceships to fly past his territory. Had the Divine Dragon Empire really reached such a precarious state? The Middle Empire's spaceships? Suddenly, a pleasant female voice rang out beside Boris's ear. Bose couldn't help but smile again. In the entire continent, there were only 2 or 3 women who could silently appear by his side without him noticing. Naturally, there was only one who could come at this time. Lady Flay. Boris turned around and cupped his fists respectfully. Legendary experts had noble statuses, regardless of faction or region. General Boris. Flay nodded her head and bowed slightly. It could be considered a serious return of the greeting. With Flay's status, she didn't even need to bow when facing the human emperor. However, Boris was different. He had worked hard and made great contributions, guarding Calm Wind Pass for more than 20 years. It was worth it. Lady Flay, why did you come at such a coincidence? Boris asked. However, I feel much more at ease now that you are here. What coincidence? Flay rolled her eyes after returning the greeting. I have been here for several days. I see. Boris nodded. As expected of a legendary expert, Lady Flay. You are so righteous. His Majesty thought that you wouldn't come this year. Humph. The Divine Dragon Empire is still as for now. However, Calm Wind Pass isn't. This is the defense line of all humans, Flay said. Boris agreed. Just as he was about to say something, a voice suddenly rang out and spoke before him. This person. Could he be? Mr. Lee walked up from the city wall and saw Flay at a glance. Flay looked at Boris, as if to say, who is this? Lady Flay, this is Mr. Lee, Boris introduced. Those spaceships were brought by Mr. Lee. Oh? Flay blinked her bright eyes and looked at Mr. Lee. No, no, no. Mr. Lee waved his hand. How could I dare to call myself Mr. in front of a legendary expert? I am just an insignificant person, not worth mentioning. I am Li Gui of the Middle Empire. Li Gui? Flay was stunned. The first prince of the Middle Empire? Li Gui laughed in self-mockery. Ever since my rebellious third brother successfully usurped the throne over a year ago, I am no longer the first prince. Oh. Right. The new emperor of the Middle Empire ascended the throne. I forgot about that, Flay said. Then, why are you here? You can't stay in the Middle Empire anymore, so you brought your family's wealth and surrendered to the Divine Dragon Empire? Lady Flay, you must be joking. Anger flashed in Li Gui's eyes. Even if I am not talented, I am still a descendant of the Li family. How can I be so unbearable? I came here under the orders of the Golden King of the Middle Empire. Your emperor is quite relaxed. He actually dares to let you run around with such a powerful force. Isn't he afraid of any trouble? Flay said, finding it strange. Li Gui gently shook his head, not explaining. Even though Li Gui did not explain, Flay seemed to understand. She muttered, that's true. After all, Guy Mingyue is his uncle. He should be confident. Boris, who had been listening to the two at the side, suddenly said, it's starting. The two paused for a moment. Immediately after, a few loud and clear dragon roars passed through the distant surface of the sea and slowly traveled over. 2 days later, news of the high tide coming early spread throughout the Divine Dragon Empire. The empire was in an uproar. However, that was all. The high tide would always come. This year, it was just that it came early. This was within his expectations. Naturally, Hidden Shadow also received this news. Hence, he started to make preparations to take over Ruyin City. Every time Hidden Shadow thought about how difficult it was to persuade those Red Dragon followers to take advantage of the situation, he could not help shaking his head and sighing. However, Hidden Shadow could understand. The Divine Dragon Empire's people placed great importance on the high tide. Almost everyone was of one mind. Even if Hidden Shadow could not help, he should not cause trouble. This was a common sense among the Divine Dragon Empire's people. However, Hidden Shadow told the Red Dragon Empire's people to cause trouble while those heroes and warriors were risking their lives to kill the enemy. Hidden Shadow's actions did not seem appropriate. The Red Dragon Empire's people felt bad about it. It was natural that they could not accept it. This was like Hidden Shadow instigating people who had lived in the forest for generations to set fire to a mountain. It was already very good that the Red Dragon Empire's people did not fall out with him on the spot. However, as the saying went, one had no choice in the world. Hidden Shadow's actions were forced by the situation. Hidden Shadow nodded, feeling that his thoughts were correct. "What's wrong?" Lei Se asked when he saw Shadow nodding his head repeatedly. "Huh?" Hidden Shadow recovered his wits. "Nothing. How are the arrangements in Ruyin City?" "Everything is in place." After Lei Se said that, he looked at Hidden Shadow with a hesitant expression. "What's wrong?" Hidden Shadow asked unhappily. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Lei Se asked. "If we are not careful, we might become despicable people that everyone condemns." "Haha. If you want to scold me, you don't have to beat around the bush." Hidden Shadow smiled. "However, when I was in the Middle Empire, I always heard this phrase. It's called the winner takes all." Chapter 216. Lei Se looked at Dark Shadow with a complicated expression. It was as if he was looking at a piece of trash. It was also as if he was looking at a good youth slowly falling into the abyss. He was also very puzzled in his heart. It had clearly only been a short year. How could a person change so much? "Are you sure?" Lei Se asked after thinking for a moment. "What?" Dark Shadow was still studying the map of Auspicious Cloud City. He looked very serious and did not even look up. From time to time, he would use a red pen to draw red circles on the map. If you really succeed and kill a Dragon Knight now, it will be a huge blow to the soldiers of Calm Wind Pass who are fighting against the rising tide. Isn't that a little too despicable? Again? Dark Shadow looked at Lei Se. "I've heard this many times over the past few days. Can you stop looking at me with such an innocent and wronged expression? It makes me feel like I'm forcing a good girl into prostitution." "Scram!" Lei Se said angrily. "Can't you wait until the rising tide?" "No. This is a great opportunity. If we don't take this opportunity, the risk is too great. The losses outweigh the gains." "Do you have to be like this?" "Yes." "Are you still human?" "Of course." "Then why can't I see where your bottom line is?" "Someone told me that most of the time, people compete to see who has the lowest bottom line. That's why there's a saying that a successful person doesn't care about trifles." "Who told you that?" "It's someone without a bottom line. If we use such unscrupulous methods to obtain victory, then what's the difference between us and the nobles of the Divine Dragon Empire? There's a big difference. At the very least, we won't kill the innocent. What if the Dragon Knights are innocent? How is that possible? Then have you thought about how many brave soldiers of Calm Wind Pass will die for nothing if one Dragon Knight dies?" Dark Shadow fell silent for a moment before saying, "We must obtain Auspicious Cloud City. However, we can't defeat the Dragon Knights, so we can only do this." You're starting to not care about anything. You're crazy. Nonsense. You and I once saw the Empire's army kill a little girl who just turned 10 years old with their spears. If you're human, you won't be indifferent. You'll go crazy. Dark Shadow's voice was bone-chilling like a cold blade. Then those warriors, soldiers dying in battle for the common people, can be considered to have died a worthy death. But didn't you also rush out at that time and behead the assailant on the spot? Reyes was talking about the battle that made Shadow famous. I don't care. Hidden Shadow suddenly roared hysterically. His eyes instantly turned red. Even if this old man has to resort to unscrupulous means, even if I have to burn in karmic flames every day after I die, I will overthrow the Divine Dragon Empire. No one can F*King stop me. F*CKU. Lacey looked at Shadow and choked with sobs. He was speechless, but more than that, he was shocked. Ewing was venting his anger alone. He said that he wanted to overthrow the Divine Dragon Empire. He made a solemn vow. It was as if there was a flame called madness burning from his body. Black smoke billowed out and pervaded the air. For those who did not understand Shadow, they would definitely think that this person was crazy. However, Lacey vaguely felt that there was a chance that Shadow would succeed. This person was too mysterious. The way he spoke was like someone from the Middle Empire, but deep down, his behavior was more like someone from the Simi Empire. Being burned in karmic flames after death. This was what the Simi Empire called karma. As for people from the Middle Empire, they were usually killed in karma. However, no matter what, it seemed that it was impossible to persuade Shadow to change his mind. 2 days later, Auspicious Cloud City. Since there were over a dozen red-robed men standing behind Shadow, he felt very confident and looked at Geraint calmly. City Lord, it has been a few days since we last met. How have you been? Shadow shouted loudly. Shadow. I didn't expect you to dare to appear in front of me, Geraint said with a frown. Are you here to die? Shadow laughed and said, Ha, City Lord must be joking. I am here to take over Auspicious Cloud City. If City Lord is willing to hand over the City Lord token, then you and I will naturally be at peace. Otherwise. With the dozen or so people behind you? Geraint shouted angrily, Ha, you overestimate yourself. City Lord, what are you talking about? Shadow asked strangely, you don't think my Red Dragon Church will attack the city like your army, do you? As soon as Shadow's voice fell, a chaotic noise sounded, followed by a few loud explosions. Then, flames soared into the sky. Geraint was startled. His eyes flashed, and he suddenly turned around and looked toward the city. He saw that more than one place in the city had suddenly burst into flames. It seemed that even if the people of the Red Dragon Church were worried about the country and the people, they still believed in Jilin's religion. This fire was set very cleanly and efficiently. You! Geraint angrily pointed at Shadow, you are courting death. Kill him for me. The ballista on Auspicious Cloud City rumbled. Countless shells were as dense as raindrops. The explosions were endless, and the earth shook. The flames covered everything on the ground, and nothing could be seen clearly. The artillery fire continued until Geraint felt that it was about time. When Shadow should have turned into ashes, he raised his hand. The artillery fire slowly stopped. The smoke and dust slowly dissipated, but the ground in front of Auspicious Cloud City was empty. There was not even a trace of blood. Where is he? Why is he gone? The soldiers' puzzled voices sounded one after another. Geraint frowned, thinking that it was not that simple. Based on Shadow's reputation, he could determine that this was not a person who could fight head-on. City Lord? Put out the fire first. Yes. Geraint hurried down the city wall with his men. As for why Shadow suddenly disappeared, he didn't want to delve into this matter. That person could even take out a teleportation array, so some small illusions should not be a problem. When he arrived in the city, Geraint realized that things were not simple. The Red Dragon Church was worthy of being a cult that always clamored to purify the world with holy fire. This fire was ruthless and accurate, and it was all at the vital points. And the fire was extremely fierce. City Lord, many places are on fire at the same time. We don't have enough manpower. A soldier shouted. Where are the fires? Geraint asked. They are all important buildings in auspicious Cloud City. Are there any houses on fire? None. Not a single one? None. It seems that these people are plotting something. Pass down my order. All personnel, spread out to put out the fire. At the same time, call on the people to put out the fire together. Those who participate in putting out the fire will be heavily rewarded. Those who take advantage of the chaos will be severely punished. Yes. In fact, there was no need for Geraint to say anything. When people found out that there was a fire near their house, they had already shouted, "Fire! Put out the fire!" They ran around with buckets and basins. In the face of fire, humans would always unite. This was because everyone knew that the fire would spread. City Lord, why are you standing down there? Come up and have a cup of tea. Suddenly, a voice sounded from above Geraint's head. Geraint looked up. Shadow stretched out half of his body and waved at him enthusiastically. Geraint looked around. There was no one around. The soldiers had been sent out by him to put out the fire. Shadow. Geraint put his hands in his arms and strode upstairs. He walked to Shadow and sat down heavily. It wasn't that he didn't think of directly killing Shadow on the spot. It was just that there were still 4 or 5 red-robed people standing behind him. City Lord, I didn't expect you to dare to come up. You are indeed a hero. Shadow said with a smile. Look at the fire set by my red dragon church. Is it beautiful? Evil cult demon. Geraint took out a black square iron plate and slapped it on the table. The iron plate was dark and looked ordinary. However, the words Auspicious Cloud were engraved on the front of the plate with golden lines. Auspicious Cloud City Lord token. Shadow saw that the target of this trip was suddenly close. For a moment, he didn't know what Geraint was doing and was stunned. Chapter 217. Although Looming Shadow saw that his target was right in front of him, he didn't act rashly because he had become a little more reserved. How did you get in? Geraint asked as he looked at Hidden Shadow. City Lord, it's not that I want to criticize you, but your city's defenses are full of loopholes compared to the Middle Empires. Why can't we get in? Hidden Shadow said with a mocking tone. However, Geraint did not get angry. Instead, he nodded gently and said, That's true. However, this is inevitable. After all, it has been several hundred years since someone dared to attack a city in the Divine Dragon Empire. What do you mean? Hidden Shadow pouted as he looked out the window. Outside, the fire was in full swing. The sound of water splashing and shouting rang out endlessly. However, the fire still lit up half the sky. After such a long time, the Red Dragon Society's people did not obstruct them. However, the fire did not weaken at all. Geraint remained calm. This is normal. Ruyan City was built by the sea. Since it was built, there has never been a fire. City Lord, you really govern by doing nothing. Hidden Shadow exclaimed. Well said. Geraint nodded. Then, he looked at the red-robed men behind Hidden Shadow and asked, Who are these people? Naturally, they are the big gifts that my Red Dragon Society prepared for you, City Lord. Hidden Shadow casually gestured at the red-robed men behind him, as if they were some kind of commodity. The red-robed men were so angry that their hats trembled slightly. Your society really thinks highly of me, Geraint said. Of course, Hidden Shadow said. However, since we have invested so much, I believe that City Lord will not let us return empty-handed, right? What do you want? Geraint narrowed his eyes. Although he withdrew the cold and ferocious glint in his eyes, he gave off an even more dangerous feeling. He looked like a coiled snake preparing to pounce on its prey. We want this city, Hidden Shadow said indifferently. There was no fear on his face. This city has nothing, Geraint said. It can even be said to be isolated from the world. If you want a rebel, I don't think you'll set your base camp in Divine Dragon City. Of course, We have to find a place isolated from the world to accumulate strength. Geraint was stunned. Although everyone knew that the Red Dragon Society had big plans, they did not expect them to be this big. This was a delusional attempt to overturn the universe. It seems that you've determined that I'm doomed today? Geraint looked at Shadow and said. City Lord, why do you say that? Ewing said innocently, but you're right. The people behind me are 4 peak 5th Order and 2 6th Order. Moreover, each of them has experienced hundreds of battles. Under such circumstances, I really don't think the City Lord has any room to turn things around. Ha ha. Geraint looked up to the sky and laughed. He said to Shadow, Good. 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 Well done. Your Excellency really lives up to the name of Shadow. Sure enough, it was full of changes and unpredictable. You risked your life to enter my auspicious Cloud City alone, and figured out the layout of my city, as well as the layout of the city. Then, like the silent spring rain, they sent people to infiltrate my Ruyan city one after another to make preparations for the fire. It seemed like a crazy move, but it was also a ploy to lure the tiger away from the mountain. Seizing the opportunity when I had no soldiers by my side, he trapped me, causing me to be like a tiger falling from the sky, a dragon trapped in the shallows. Like a turtle in a jar. City Lord, you're exaggerating. Shadow cupped his fists and said, It's just a small trick, not worth mentioning, not worth mentioning. What a pity. Geraint suddenly sighed. What's a pity? Shadow asked. It's a pity that you're not familiar with the City Lord command, and you're not decisive enough. Geraint said faintly, the reason why the fire didn't weaken is because the soldiers of auspicious Cloud City didn't participate. Now, the ones putting out the fire are some civilians, so it's so chaotic. Shadow stared at Geraint, silently holding the long sword at his waist. Since my soldiers didn't go to put out the fire, where do you think they are? Geraint said. There was no need to guess. The fire was so big, but the soldiers didn't go to put out the fire. Naturally, there was something more important than putting out the fire. What could be more important than putting out the fire? Of course, they were the evil cultists, the newly promoted traitors and traitors. Shadow, there's a large army coming towards us. We're surrounded. A red-robed man said anxiously. Not long after, the sound of dong 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 came from the stairs, and 3 red-robed men ran up. Ewing slowly stood up. These 3 people were specially left behind to guard the escape route. But these 3 people appeared here, which meant there was no way out. Just as Ewing was about to say something, 2 more sounds of wind breaking could be heard. 2 more red-robed men rushed in from the window. Shadow looked at the 2 men, thinking, this is the 2nd floor. Although it's not high, how urgent is it that these 2 men didn't even have time to go up the stairs? Do they have to jump on the roof? There are people downstairs, the red-robed man who came up last simply said. Shadow glanced at Shadow, got up, walked to the window, and looked down. With just a glance, Shadow withdrew his gaze. I'm afraid all the soldiers of auspicious Cloud City are here. Countless heavily armed soldiers blocked all the roads outside this small tea house. A little further away, there were hundreds of armor-piercing crossbows, aimed here without any blind spots. It seemed that if anyone wanted to escape through the window, they would be shot into a miserable hedgehog. The people of the Red Dragon sect were not disciples of the King Kong sect, so they didn't have any defensive techniques. The red robes of the Red Dragon sect were not made of precious materials, but like cloth robes, they couldn't block the arrows of the armor-piercing crossbows. There were no legendary powerhouses of the 8th rank present, and no one could release aura, form armor, and be invulnerable to swords and spears. To put it simply, they were trapped. In the blink of an eye, the situation reversed, and Shadow and the others became turtles in a jar. The City Lord's token naturally has the ability to command the army in the city. As long as you're in the City Lord's token can contact all the troops. Geraint said. But City Lord, did you forget? You're still in our hands. What are you showing off for? Shadow glared at Geraint and said coldly, as long as we can take down the City Lord, who would dare to not surrender? Geraint shrugged indifferently. Look! What are they doing? A red-robed man cried out in alarm. Shadow stared blankly, walked to the window again, and carefully looked down, only to see that the soldiers below had placed branches and straw in the corner of the tea house. Shadow looked at the red-robed man and said with a sneer, "You still don't understand? They're setting us on fire to burn us to death. City Lord, you're quite creative." Shadow looked at Geraint and said, "Not bad, I think you'll like this way of dying." Geraint smiled happily, his eyes narrowed. Chapter 218. Gathering the Red Dragon followers, who worshipped fire and believed in the Red Dragon god and clamoring to use the holy fire to purify the world, would burn them all to death. To the Divine Dragon Empire's nobles, this was indeed an excellent idea. As Dark Shadow looked at Geraint, he suddenly felt like he understood a lot. He had fallen into a trap. "Is there any way to charge out?" Dark Shadow asked as he looked at the red-robed men with a sliver of hope. Without exception, all the red-robed men shook their heads. Although this scene was within Dark Shadow's expectations, his heart could not help sinking. All of this was premeditated. Geraint used the entire auspicious Cloud City as a trap to lure them into the trap. No wonder the Red Dragon followers could infiltrate auspicious Cloud City so easily. No wonder the soldiers could sift out the experts Dark Shadow left behind to guard the escape route from the complicated streets and alleys. No wonder Geraint did not feel any heartache when he saw the overwhelming fire. Geraint could even calmly converse with Dark Shadow. Indeed, compared to killing evil sect members and traitors like himself, the losses were naturally nothing. "Your Excellency Dark Shadow, I advise you not to waste your efforts." Geraint even took out a folding fan and opened it. Then, he gently fanned himself. "To capture you people, my auspicious Cloud City suffered heavy losses. I believe your Excellency will not let me lose everything, right?" Dark Shadow clenched his fists tightly. What Geraint said was what he had just said outside the city. He did not expect to be returned to him so quickly. "Take him down." Dark Shadow could not be bothered to say anything more. If he dilly-dallied for a while longer, the soldiers might set the city on fire. At that time, he would truly be in a pinch. If he took down Geraint now and obtained the City Lord's token, he still had a chance to turn defeat into victory. The red-robed men had been waiting impatiently for this sentence for a long time. As soon as Bane's voice fell, the two red-robed men rushed out. The red-robed men let out loud flapping noises. Geraint picked up the teacup in his hand and tossed it at Dark Shadow. It looked like he wanted to make a final gamble or drag someone down with him before he died. The full-power toss of a rank 6 expert, a city lord, naturally had a horrifying momentum. Even an ordinary teacup became extremely terrifying. The green porcelain teacup turned into a green light and shot towards Ewing. An armored arm shield appeared in front of Ewing in a split second, as if he had expected this. Dang! The shield made a loud noise, and the red-robed man couldn't help but take a step back. "What a pity," Geraint whispered. Under Geraint's regretful gaze, the celadone teacup turned into a cluster of fine celadone powder and scattered in the air. It was bright and shiny, and looked very beautiful. Geraint used this one and only chance to attack Shadow, so he had no chance to resist the two red-robed men. Logically speaking, there were only two paths for Geraint to take at this time. He could either surrender or be executed. However, Geraint was no ordinary Tier 6 powerhouse. He was also the Divine Dragon Empire's City Lord. The black and cold City Lord token shone brightly without any warning. The two red-robed men were shocked. They each took out a short sword from somewhere and directly stabbed at Geraint. The two short swords seemed to be a pair. Moreover, there were beautiful lightning patterns on them. Even an ignorant child could tell at a glance that they were not ordinary items. A Stage 6 powerhouse wielding such a godly weapon, even if it was piercing through gold and splitting rocks, it would be a common thing. However, when these two swords touched the light emitted by the City Lord token, they actually stopped abruptly. No matter how hard the two Tier 6 powerhouses tried, they couldn't advance even an inch. The City Lord token was indeed extraordinary. It actually forced two Tier 6 Red Dragon followers to retreat, in the blink of an eye, from the moment the two red-robed men pounced, to Geraint throwing the teacup at Ewing, and finally forcing the two red-robed men to retreat with the City Lord token. Only a short moment passed. Even before Ewing could react, the matter was already over. Ewing looked through the shield in front of him and saw the shattered porcelain teacup floating in the air. He secretly rejoiced in his heart. Fortunately, I was smart and made arrangements in advance. This teacup was too fast. I couldn't react at all. If I was hit by it, I would be seriously injured even if I didn't die. Lightning? Geraint asked suspiciously. I didn't expect the Red Dragon sect to mobilize the two of you for me. Geraint's voice pulled Ewing out of his rejoicing mood. It made him return to the cruel reality that he was still in a predicament. Lightning was the name of the two swords. The swords were split into yin and yang. When they danced, there was the sound of thunder. When they were combined, they were invincible. These two swords had caused a lot of bloodshed in the Divine Dragon Empire. Many rich and heartless people had died under these two swords. However, they failed to pierce through the city today. I didn't expect the City Lord token to have such an ability. Ewing said bitterly. The entire city's power to protect one person. Ewing's expression turned very ugly. If he couldn't take down Geraint, it would be very difficult for him to be kind today. Your Excellency, you don't have to do this. Seeing Ewing's ugly expression, Geraint comforted him instead. I'm also very regretful that I didn't manage to take your life with the attack just now. For some reason, Ewing sneered. What do you have to regret, City Lord? Before Ewing finished speaking, the tip of his nose twitched involuntarily. Suddenly, he smelled a strange scent. This smell suddenly appeared, and it was very abrupt. However, Ewing faintly felt that it was somewhat familiar. It was a bit like the incense that he and Lord Sword Saint went to the ancestral hall of Sword Mountain to pray and lit up. However, in the next moment, Ewing knew that he was wrong because that smell suddenly became very pungent and strong. There were also pa sounds coming from outside the window. They lit a fire. The red-robed man, who had been hiding behind the window, shouted loudly. Impossible. This was Ewing's first thought. He concluded that it was impossible for the people below to set a fire, so he stayed here with a group of people. Even if they were surrounded by the enemy, he didn't care at all. Even if they piled firewood on the wall below, it didn't matter. The reason was simple, because Geraint was still here. With the City Lord here, who would dare to set a fire? Unless there was a very ambitious guy who wanted to burn the previous City Lord to death and then take over. However, Ewing felt that this kind of melodramatic thing shouldn't happen to him. Then there was only one possibility, that was, Geraint ordered the fire himself. You ordered people to set the fire? Shadow bluntly asked the question in his mind. Sure enough, Geraint nodded gently, confirming his guess. How did you order the people below? Was it also the City Lord token? Geraint shook his head gently and smiled slightly. No, it was a signal by smashing the cup. Chapter 219. The raging fire began to burn. The billowing smoke rushed in through the windows and instantly turned the white walls black. The soldiers outside were still on standby, holding the army destroyer crossbows and aiming at the doors and windows of the tea house. They didn't even blink, afraid that they would miss a moment. Because they couldn't guarantee that the evil cultists inside wouldn't be able to take it anymore and break out of the window or something. This was a common method used by hunters when hunting. They lit a fire at the entrance of the prey's nest and let the smoke enter the nest. When the prey couldn't take it anymore and rushed out, the hunter would wait outside. They had already made all the preparations. They either set up traps, or waited with loaded crossbows in their hands. This tactic could not be considered brilliant, let alone innovative. It was just like the breaking cup as a signal. It was an old tactic used by countless humans. This tactic didn't have the slightest surprise effect, but it was very stable. It was like a man over 50 years old. Although there was no surprise, there was no accident, Sir Mayor, I still have one thing I don't understand. Although Shadow was already burning with anxiety, he still forced himself to calm down and asked aloud. But the slightly anxious gaze in his eyes couldn't be concealed. Compared to him, the rest of the Red Dragon sect seemed much calmer. They looked really calm, as if they really felt that even if they were burned to death, they would get what they wanted. Please speak. Geraint seemed to be equally calm. He even smiled and nodded to Shadow. Shadow frowned slightly and couldn't help but glance around. He thought to himself, am I the only one who's anxious now? Are these people crazy? Isn't this place about to be engulfed by the fire? Do you really think that you're not afraid of being burned by the fire because you believe in Jilin? Or is it that the fire doesn't hurt? Is the effect of religious brainwashing so good? Shadow forcibly suppressed the thoughts in his heart, looked at Geraint and asked, Sir Mayor, you're still here, but you ordered the fire. Do you want to die with us? Although your City Lord's token can withstand the combined attack of a Tier 6 powerhouse, it probably can't withstand the high temperature of the flames. Even if the flames can't burn you, you'll be roasted alive. In the end, the difference between you and us is that we are a pile of charcoal, and you are a piece of smoked meat. As Shadow spoke, the smoke in the tea house became thicker and thicker. The temperature was also rising. The thick black smoke was mixed with a lot of dust. Just breathing in it would make people cough non-stop. The thick smoke had begun to obscure Shadow's vision. However, he could clearly sense that his companions were already sitting cross-legged on the ground. No one knew if it was to avoid the smoke above or if it had already given up hope and was sitting there waiting for death. That's an interesting metaphor. Geraint's face began to sweat. But what do you mean by that? I'm just trying to help the City Lord understand the situation and advise the City Lord to let the people below put out the fire. Shadow said. Ha ha, cough cough, Geraint threw his head back and laughed. However, he couldn't help but start coughing violently. It seemed like he had inhaled 2 large mouthfuls of smoke due to his laughter. It seemed that Shadow was right. Not only was the City Lord's token unable to withstand the high temperature, but it was also unable to withstand the dust and the thick smoke. What are you laughing at? Shadow was not in the mood to laugh at Geraint's embarrassing appearance and asked anxiously. I'm laughing at you. Geraint's face was full of tears and he couldn't even open his eyes. No one knew if he was laughing or choking. Laughing at me? I didn't expect the famous Shadow in the Red Dragon Society to be a false believer. You're actually afraid of fire. Just because I'm afraid of fire? Yes. What kind of existence do the people of the Red Dragon Society have in your hearts? A lunatic who worships fire, a whimsical delusional person. Is such a person worthy of being burned by fire with you? Dying together? It's worth it. Why? Shadow was puzzled. The last time he saw Geraint, although they were also enemies, it was only because they were in different camps. There was no personal grudge between them. At that time, Geraint was even willing to say a few words to him. But this time, Shadow felt as if they were the ones who killed Geraint's entire family. This guy was the one who wanted to fight them to the death. This was indeed something that Shadow did not expect. His methods were so ruthless and decisive. It was as if he was going to perish together with them, because of the time you took action. Geraint said leisurely. Although his tone was slow, it was sharp. It was as if he really saw the enemy who killed his father and couldn't live under the same sky. You are the first people who dare to do such a thing during the rising tide. Therefore, His Majesty the Hero King personally ordered that we must kill the chicken to warn the monkey so that the future generations can learn from it. The rising tide has always been a major event, and there is no room for error. No one has ever dared to be impudent. Therefore, you must die, and you must die in a shocking manner. Shadow only understood when he heard Geraint's words. So that's how it is. No wonder Geraint was so ruthless and did not leave any room for negotiation. He used himself as bait just to make them die a little more ugly. It turned out that the rising tide really couldn't be taken lightly. It turned out that the Divine Dragon Empire also had a spy in the Red Dragon Society, and that spy was right beside him. Otherwise, the Hero King wouldn't have known in advance and given such an order. Shadow understood and nodded at Geraint. Then, he got up and walked to the middle of the red-robed men, wanting to lean against the wall and sit down. They were waiting for death together. As soon as Shadow leaned against the wall, he felt that something was wrong and hurriedly moved forward. The raging fire outside was burning the wall. Now, the wall was very hot. He admitted defeat. As the lord of a city, Geraint could perish together with them. No one could have predicted this. Speaking of which, Shadow had only been in the Divine Dragon Empire for a year. During this period, he had devised countless schemes and cheated many people. Some of those people had higher realms than him, and some were smarter than him. However, they were all cheated by him. It was fate, but it was also as he and Rhys had said. His bottom line was lower than theirs. It could be considered exciting and soul-stirring. However, they were all daunting but not dangerous. It was only today that Shadow had truly lost their hand. He didn't expect that he would lose his life this time. He felt a little indignant when he thought about it, but it was nothing. He had cheated many people to death. Shadow admitted that his life was not more valuable than those people's. Moreover, the city lord had risked his life to accompany him this time. Just now, Shadow asked Geraint if it was worth it. Geraint said, yes. Now, Shadow felt that he was quite worth it. The black smoke grew bigger and bigger. It gradually occupied the entire upper floor and was still spreading downwards. It wasn't that Shadow didn't think of going downstairs, but the temperature downstairs was even higher. Only now did Shadow realize that he had thought wrong about one thing. That fire couldn't burn in at all. Most of the buildings in Royan City, including this tea house, were made of stone. Wooden village was rarely used. Royan City was close to the sea. Being close to the sea meant that there was a lot of humidity. With high humidity, the wood was easily damp and easily rotted. Therefore, unless it was set up in advance by those fire experts like the Red Dragon sect, it would be very difficult to burn from the inside out. Therefore, it was wrong for Shadow to say that he and the others would become a pile of charcoal and be directly burned to death. They should have been suffocated to death by the thick smoke or roasted to death. Bang! Shadow took out a pitch-black short sword from his sleeve. The pitch-black short sword didn't reflect a glimmer of light. The pure black seemed to be able to suck in people's eyes. Although Shadow had never used the short sword after learning the no-return sword from the Sword Saint, he had always worn it close to his body and had never left it. Because this was a weapon made by the dwarves for Shadow. It was extremely precious. Shadow looked at this simple and beautiful short sword and felt a little lonely. Who would have thought that after a year, this sword would once again reveal its sharpness, but in the end, it would be used on him. Shadow planned to kill himself with his own hands. Shadow wasn't a brainless Red Dragon sect member. He didn't want to be burned to death. Compared to being roasted to death or choked to death by the thick smoke, it was obviously more straightforward and more satisfying to stab himself with a knife. He would suffer less. Shadow held the sharp weapon that could cut his hair and pointed it at all the vital parts of his body. He gritted his teeth fiercely. In the end, he couldn't make up his mind. I'm sorry, everyone. Who wants a quick death? If you can't do it yourself, let me help you. Shadow looked at the motionless red-robed people sitting on the ground and asked carefully. These people had all fallen into such a desperate situation because of his stubborn plan. Everyone opposed this plan, but he didn't listen. Shadow. If you lose, you lose. Don't let others look down on our Red Dragon sect. If you can't do it yourself, I can help you. Being burned to death is the way our Red Dragon sect should die. That's right, that's right. We're already in the fire. How can our Red Dragon sect members find another way? Shadow, if you can't stand it, I'll send you on your way. Don't embarrass yourself anymore. Shadow looked helplessly at his companions who hadn't shown their faces so far. He couldn't say anything. He just put away the short sword. Perhaps humans were like this. They would always have hope until the last moment. Even if it meant paying a greater price. Suddenly, a low laugh sounded. Shadow glanced at Geraint and ignored him. He felt that this person was really hopeless. He and the red-robed people were sitting on the ground. He wanted to lie down because the air above was getting more and more polluted. But only that person was still sitting on the stool with an indifferent expression. He still maintained the demeanor of a city lord. When he first saw Geraint, Shadow felt that this person liked to put on airs. Now, he didn't think so. How was this liking? This was simply love. This was using his life to show off. Shadow gave Geraint a thumbs up in his heart. At this time, he was really convinced. The thick smoke finally drowned Shadow's face. He choked and coughed non-stop. Most of the red-robed people were the same. At this time, there was no difference between a rank 6 powerhouse and a rank 3 powerhouse like Shadow. As for Geraint's side, there was no sound. Shadow had probably choked and fainted. Who asked him to sit so high? However, he was also a ruthless person. He didn't cough again before he fainted. Although Shadow felt that he should be holding it in, he couldn't help but admire him. Because he couldn't help it, Shadow coughed louder and louder. The more he coughed, the more smoke he inhaled. His lungs began to hurt violently. His throat felt like it was on fire. Until Shadow's consciousness began to fade. Am I going to die? Where would I go after I die? According to Qilin, hell was filled with thick smoke and fire. The human undead were burned by the raging flames and suffered all kinds of torment. Isn't that the same as now? I don't want to go there. According to Staya, heaven was not bad. It was the territory of God. As long as humans went there, they would be peaceful and happy. It sounded good, but when he thought about what he had done recently, it seemed that going to heaven was a bit difficult. According to Aisha, people wouldn't go there even if they died. They would simply be gone, simply gone. They would lose their consciousness and wouldn't be able to feel anything. They wouldn't be able to feel anything, not even themselves. That was the greatest horror in the world. Shadow felt that compared to Aisha's words, he wanted to go to the hell that Qilin said more. Am I wrong? If I listened to Qilin's words and came here to ask for information about the Elven Island in a low-key manner and didn't get involved in the matters here, would I be wandering around a street in the Divine Dragon Empire right now? Instead of becoming a piece of bacon. Shadow was already lying on the ground. He couldn't even cough. He even regretted that he didn't give himself a quick death just now. He used his trembling hand to touch the scar on his eye with great difficulty. He thought of the little girl that was killed by the soldiers. As he was about to die, Yu Ying's mouth twitched slightly, and he grinned. I'm not wrong. I'm not wrong. No one is wrong. Shadow's voice was as soft as a mosquito's. However, he had already used all his strength to say those words. Shadow fainted after he finished speaking. No one could hear him. Those were the last words he said to himself. Those were the last words he said to the world. I'm not wrong. How unreasonable, how self-righteous, how strong. The tea house was completely silent. Only the thick smoke that was so thick that one couldn't even see one's fingers were rolling. It was very similar to the scene of demons and ghosts appearing in legends. Suddenly, a series of exclamations sounded. It was as if the soldiers outside had really seen some demons and ghosts. Then, there was another loud bang. Then, a gust of wind blew into the tea house. The thick smoke was blown away in an instant, and the dazzling sunlight poured down, shining on the bodies of the people lying on the ground in a disorderly manner. The roof of the tea house was lifted. The entire interior of the tea house was exposed to the blue sky. The fire that was burning under the tea house was quietly extinguished at some point. Fresh air rushed in. Shadow's body moved slightly. Then, a series of heart-wrenching coughs sounded. When the coughing stopped, Shadow struggled to raise his head. He used his blurry eyes to observe the situation around him. Then, he discovered that there was one more person in the tea house. That person stood there and strolled leisurely. His unbelievably clean clothes attracted people's attention. His red hair was as bright as flames. His golden eyes were glaring. Shadow looked at him, opened his mouth and murmured. Qilin, end of chapter. I hope that before I die, the last thing I say is that I'm not wrong. I'm still alive. I don't know if anyone has thought about this. Chapter 220. Humans shouldn't regret or deny everything they've done. Even if it was wrong, humans could pay the price for their mistakes, but they couldn't regret it. No matter how much they regretted it, time wouldn't start over. Even if you were to tell others about your remorse with tears streaming down your face, they wouldn't be able to empathize with you. They would only secretly laugh with a heavy expression on their faces. Qilin walked up to Yuing and lifted him up by the collar with one hand before placing him on the ground. Ugh! Shadow's eyes popped out of their sockets the moment he was lifted up. He couldn't help but stick out his tongue. Shadow was almost strangled to death by Jilin's actions. Luckily, Jilin put him down quickly. What are you doing here? Jilin looked around and frowned. Didn't I ask you to gather information about the Elven Island? Why are you still playing here? Am I playing? What am I playing? Am I playing with my life? Shadow was so angry that he couldn't even speak. The little bit of warmth in her heart when she saw Qilin disappeared completely in an instant. How's the information? Qilin asked with a serious expression. Can't you ask me if I'm okay first? I almost died in the fire just now. There's no need to ask. You won't die. You. Shadow was so angry that he wanted to curse. However, when he thought about how cruel Jilin was, he didn't dare to. He changed the topic and asked, Do you have water? Jilin frowned. Have you seen me drink water? Why would I have that? Don't dragons drink water? Did you get any information? I'm thirsty. Crimson Unicorn stared at Hidden Shadow for a while until Hidden Shadow started to avoid his gaze. Jilin thought that humans were really troublesome. However, he still thought about it and a red fireball appeared in Jilin's hand. Shadow didn't know what Jilin wanted to do. However, he knew that although the fireball in Jilin's hand didn't look big, it definitely had the power to destroy the heavens and earth. Compared to the small fireball, the fire and thick smoke that he had just experienced should be considered as a spring breeze brushing against his face. Without waiting for Shadow to say anything, Crimson Lin tossed the fireball casually. The fireball suddenly turned into a red meteor and fell into the sea not far away under Shadow's nervous gaze. Then, there was a deafening explosion. Shadow couldn't help but cover his ears. Then, there was another earthquake. Shadow looked at the other buildings that were swaying and collapsing. Only the half-ruined tea house under his feet was as stable as Mount Tai. The huge explosion created huge waves in the sea. It was unknown whether it was due to Qilin's control or something else, but it did not form into a tsunami. Instead, it instantly turned into a sea of water. Countless water vapor rose into the sky and turned into clouds. The clouds grew bigger and darker. Finally, it was as black as ink and covered the sky. Thus, a heavy rain fell on Ruyan City. Like a downpour. Shadow looked up at the rain in a daze. His feelings were indescribable. He only asked Qilin if there was any water, but Qilin made it rain for him. Can you tell me now? Qilin looked at Shadow. What did you find out? A lot. This time, Shadow said straightforwardly. He finally understood. The branches that grew out of the Scarlet Unicorn were all towering trees. Tell me. First of all, the Elven Island is a mysterious island hidden in the endless vastness. Legend has it that it is the place where the elves live. Do I need you to tell me that? Didn't we already know about this a year ago? Tell me. Legend has it that only through a special method or by being chosen by the Elven Queen can land on the Elven Island. Only humans can be chosen? Anyway, that's what the legends say. Okay, go on. You can't interrupt anymore. Yes, 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 legend has it that there is a lake on the Elven Island. The surface of the lake is always like a mirror. No matter how strong the wind is, it can't cause a ripple. However, this lake is like a mirage. It often disappears. Legend has it that the Elven Island is filled with mist all year round. Anyone can get lost in it. Legend has it that the Elven Island hides a mountain of gold. All the wealth in the world can't compare to it. Legend has it that the Elven Island has a spring of life. Legend has it that the Elven Island has a sapling of the world tree. That's enough. Jilin listened for a long time and finally couldn't help but raise his hand to stop Shadow from talking non-stop. Why are you talking so much about legends? Did you come here to listen to stories? Can the legends of humans be trusted? Shadow didn't panic. He seemed to have expected this. He calmly said to Jilin, yes, these legends can't be trusted. However, these legends have one thing in common. They must be trustworthy. What do they have in common? It's here. Shadow pointed at his feet. Here? Jilin looked down. It's Ruyan City. Shadow rolled his eyes. These legends are said to be spread by people who have been to the Elven Island. And all of them came out from here. Jilin frowned. So your goal is the Elven Island. Geraint had already woken up. He woke up when Jilin made that rain. Not only him, even the red-robed people on the ground had woken up, because they were all experts that were much stronger than Yuing. This was a matter of course. However, these people tacitly stayed motionless. In other words, they pretended to be dead. They could all feel that Jilin's strength was too terrifying. Although they didn't see how Jilin opened the tea house, they could feel how Jilin made that rain. From the moment Jilin took out the fireball, these people suddenly realized how small they were. It was as if they were standing alone under a landslide or a tsunami. After that, they heard the conversation between Yuing and Jilin. Shadow really didn't notice it, and Jilin did, but he didn't care. Until Geraint spoke, the red-robed people still planned to stay motionless. You actually want to encroach on Ruyan City for that illusory legend? You? Geraint was obviously panicking. This is? Jilin looked at Shadow. Shadow muttered to himself for a while and organized his words. It was never easy to introduce a human to Jilin. He is the boss of this place, Shadow nodded and said. He knows the way to the Elven Island? Jilin looked at Geraint again. He probably doesn't know, Shadow said. Trash. Jilin didn't bother to look at him again. The Elven Island is a legendary place. We don't know if it exists or not. Even if your excellency's strength is extraordinary, you can't do anything about it, Geraint said. I advise your excellency to give up your delusions and work for the Divine Dragon Empire. Your excellency destroyed half of my Ruyan city. I believe His Majesty the Hero King will let bygones be bygones. Why don't your excellency turn over a new leaf? You are a little annoying. Jilin looked at Geraint and said indifferently. Chapter 221. If Jilin said that a human was annoying, then that human would soon lose the ability to speak. This was Shadow's thought. Shadow stood in front of Jilin, tugged at his sleeve, and said anxiously, "You can't kill this person. There's a use for him." He was afraid that if he spoke any slower, it would be too late. Geraint was already sweating profusely when Jilin glanced at him, but he was still unwilling to give up. He suppressed his fear and said, "Your Excellency, do you really want to ally with the Red Dragon sect and become enemies with the Divine Dragon Empire? Do you know that there are 2 Dragon Knights from the Divine Dragon Empire nearby? If you had. What is it?" Jilin suddenly turned his head and stared at Geraint. Shadow was stunned on the spot, as if he had been struck by lightning. Only now did he realize that he had still underestimated the Red Dragon sect. In the eyes of the Hero King, they were so hateful and irreconcilable. What was irreconcilable? It meant that in this world, there would be no one but me. The Hero King could actually send out 2 Dragon Knights during the high tide to kill them. From the looks of it, the Hero King's hatred for them ran deep. However, this was not the main point now. The main point was that Geraint had said the words Dragon Knights just now. Although Shadow knew this term, he had never dared to say it in front of Jilin. Impossible. Shadow suddenly shouted. In order to protect Geraint's life, he could only divert Jilin's attention like this. Although Jilin was powerful and had learned a lot from Staya, Staya's education methods made Jilin's thoughts simpler than most humans. Sure enough, Jilin turned his head and asked, "What are you doing?" Ewing ignored him. Instead, he continued, "That's impossible. As far as I know, the Divine Dragon Empire no longer has any extra wyverns to deal with the rising tide. How could they possibly send 2 of them to deal with us? How do you know how many dragons there are in the Empire?" Geraint asked in shock. Seeing that he was about to mention that word again, Ewing hurriedly interrupted him and said before he could, "Based on my Red Dragon Society's intelligence system and the descriptions of those who witnessed the flying dragon, it's not hard to guess. The Red Dragon sect is indeed a great threat to the Empire." Geraint looked at Shadow and said in a deep voice, "But why is it impossible?" "Because there aren't enough dragons. Originally, it wasn't enough, but this time, we have help." "Helper? There's no harm in telling you. It's the Middle Empire." Geraint looked at Jilin and said. He pointed out the friendly relationship between the 2 empires in hopes of intimidating Jilin and making him back off. However, what he didn't know was that the reason why the empires that had always been fighting and killing each other suddenly became united and friendly and helped each other was because of him. Middle Empire? Ewing glanced at Jilin. "That's right. A new emperor of the Middle Empire ascended the throne a year ago. The new emperor is indeed a wise ruler. I don't know what method he used to convince His Majesty, the Hero King, to allow the golden spaceship of the Middle Empire to fly over the Divine Dragon Empire." Ewing blinked in a daze, feeling that this was how the world played tricks on people. At this moment, the sound of huge creatures flapping their wings rang out. Geraint and Ewing couldn't help but look up. The red-robed people were still firmly motionless, 2 silhouettes were rapidly approaching from the sky. They were the flying dragons of the Divine Dragon Empire. The dragons' erect horns were exceptionally fierce. Every one of their sharp scales shone under the sunlight. Their huge wings were thick and powerful. Every flap was like a gust of wind. They were beautiful and strong creatures. A hint of joy appeared on Geraint's face, but then it froze on his face. His eyes shrunk to the size of a needle tip. This was because there weren't any so-called knights on the backs of the 2 flying dragons. Instead, the things in the mouths of the 2 flying dragons were a little similar. Geraint didn't want to think about what happened next. However, what was difficult for Geraint to accept was obvious to Ewing. It was nothing more than Jilin encountering these 2 dragon knights on the way here. Of course, Jilin didn't like them, so he let the flying dragons kill the dragon knights. He didn't even have to do it himself. Impossible. Geraint's lips trembled. He tried several times before shouting this sentence. "Why is it impossible?" Jilin looked at him and said playfully. "How can the flying dragons hurt the knights?" Geraint obviously couldn't accept it. They have gone through life and death together. They are the closest comrade-in-arms and companions. Jilin sneered. He took a step forward, lifted Geraint up, and pressed him against the wall. He looked at him and said coldly, "Comrade-in-arms and companions? Don't joke around, human. Would you ride your comrade-in-arms and companions everywhere? Humans will only treat other life forms as food, tools, and pets. If you really treated them as companions, why would you set a restriction in their bloodline? The flying dragons are too powerful. If they aren't controlled, did I allow you to speak?" Jilin's voice was full of anger. It was like a volcano that was about to erupt. Once it erupted, it would destroy the world. Shadow saw that Jilin was already gritting his teeth and talking, so he wisely stopped interrupting. Geraint was dead. Jilin's hand rose with flames, and Geraint was instantly burned to ashes. He was burned to the point that even his ashes were gone, except for a black figure left on the wall of the tea house. It was clean as if this person had never existed in the world. Shadow picked up the City Lord token that fell on the ground. He was glad that this thing didn't turn into nothingness with Geraint. "Why are you still holding it? Throw it away." Jilin waved his hand and didn't look back. The 2 flying dragons had already landed on the broken wall of the tea house. When they heard Jilin's words, they turned their heads and casually threw the body and their mouths down. It was as casual as humans throwing away garbage. Jilin asked them to kill the humans, so they killed them. They were indeed a little tired after holding it for so long. And as Jilin said, human meat didn't taste good. Jilin had already walked to the side of the tea house. He stood on the wall and looked at the sea. The golden light in his eyes was like two scorching suns. The golden light was so dazzling that Shadow couldn't open his eyes. He could only use his hands to block it. He hadn't seen Jilin's eyes so bright for a long time. Now, Jilin stood there and gazed at the seaside with glowing eyes, as if he was a human-shaped lighthouse. Shadow thought in his heart. "What are you looking at?" Shadow asked. "Looking at the road," Jilin said lightly. "Looking at the road?" Shadow's voice went up an octave. He was very surprised. He thought to himself, "Brother, when did you look at the road? Are you walking? What road are you looking at?" Shadow asked. "The road to the Elf Island," Jilin said. Shadow stopped breathing and looked at Jilin. His eyes suddenly widened, and he asked in a trembling voice, "Did you see it?" "I saw it." Chapter 222. You saw it? Ewing exclaimed. His voice was filled with disbelief. The Elven Island was extremely mysterious and originally only existed in human legends. In order to find the Elven Island, Hidden Shadow had already prepared for a long battle. That was why he decided to take over Ruoyan City, so that it would be convenient for him to investigate the Elven Island in the future. But he didn't expect that the matter that he put in so much effort and risked his life to not even find a clue would be easily solved by Jilin's arrival. No one could easily accept something like this, because it would make him seem too stupid and insignificant. "It was you who found this place." Jilin looked at Hidden Shadow and said seriously, "Otherwise, the sea would be too big, and this path would be too faint. I wouldn't be able to find it." Hearing Jilin's rare consolation, Hidden Shadow felt a little better. He looked at Jilin and said, "Then what do we do now? Let's go explore." After saying that, Jilin revealed his true body in a ball of flames, grabbed Hidden Shadow, and flapped his wings, instantly disappearing. Only a red line could be seen flying in the sky, disappearing in the blink of an eye. The tea house was already badly burned by the flames, and then half of it was destroyed by Jilin. The internal structure was already unstable. Now, it finally couldn't withstand the power of Jilin's wings and collapsed under Jilin's wind, turning into ruins. Debris flew everywhere. The red-robed people could no longer pretend to be dead. They all got up and rushed out of the collapsed tea house. Looking at the empty street, they looked at each other. On the vast and boundless sea, there was a vast expanse of mist, and the sky was also an extremely clean deep blue. Hidden Shadow looked at the horizon, but he couldn't see the boundary between the sea and the sky. It was as if the entire world had turned blue, and only the clouds were white. Jilin's body was the size of a small mountain, freely flying in the sky. Sometimes forward, sometimes left, sometimes flying in circles, it seemed like he was flying casually out of boredom. "Have you finished forging your divine artifact?" Hidden Shadow was the first to break the dead silence. "Not yet, but soon." "Then why are you here?" "To see you." "What's so nice about me?" "Let's see your progress." "Are you in a hurry?" "Yes." "Staya is dying?" "Yes." Once again, Shadow and Jilin fell into silence. When Staya first saw that Jilin was extremely weak and only had one clone in this world, she thought that it was a great opportunity to eliminate Jilin for all of humanity. Therefore, he brazenly attacked, truly risking his life. She used her identity as the Saintess of the Light to force the god to descend, and then sacrificed herself. Her body was already in tatters. Saying that he still had a breath left was an understatement. The fact that he was still alive was all thanks to the protective ability of the Holy Grimoire of Light and Jilin's careful care. But in the end, he was only treating the symptoms and not the root cause. Now that things had come to this, was he finally unable to hold on any longer? No wonder Jilin was so anxious. Ewing thought. "Why are you always beating around the bush?" Ewing pondered for a moment and finally couldn't help but ask. Jilin had already flown around the small island 3 times in such a short period of time. Now, it seemed like he would have to fly around 3 more times anyway. This is how the road is, Jilin said. Road? Hearing this, Ewing raised his eyebrows and looked down through the gaps between Jilin's fingers. The blue sea was vast and boundless. There was no road. Besides, there was no road that required you to go around the same place 3 times. The Elven Island is an arcane realm, Jilin said. Arcane realm? Yes, for humans, it should be a different world that doesn't exist in this world. For a place like this, if you want to go, you must take a specific route and use a specific method. Where's the route? There's a green road in the sea, hidden in the sea, very thin and faint. Why can't I see it? You can't see it. Shadow was speechless. He angrily retracted his futile gaze. He wanted to ignore Jilin, but after thinking for a while, he felt that it was inappropriate, so he asked, Jilin, why are you looking for the Elven Island? Jilin turned his head and glanced at him. The intense golden light caused Jilin's shadow to shrink. To save Staya, of course, Jilin said. That's right, we are going to ask for help. Ewing said, do you know that in the human world, no matter how strong a man is, he won't disrespect a doctor? I don't know about that, Jilin said straightforwardly. Anyway, you have to remember, we can't fight with the people from the Elven Island. Ewing said, otherwise, even if you sink the Elven Island, you won't be able to save Staya. Jilin was silent for a long time, then he said one word. Yes. Phew. Ewing let out a long sigh of relief. The Elven Island that had been praised by humans for thousands of years, if it disappeared in front of his eyes, or if it was burned down by fire, it wouldn't be good. Why did you stop? Ewing suddenly noticed that the clouds in the sky were no longer moving, so he knew that Jilin had stopped. He couldn't help but ask curiously. He thought to himself, did the path tell you to wait here? Of course, that was impossible. Although there were all kinds of paths in this world, and some of them might even make you walk in a big circle, they wouldn't make you wait. That was because the so-called path was something that made people move forward. No matter if it was a human or a dragon, if he suddenly stopped walking, there were only 2 possibilities. Either he was tired, or he had arrived. That was a very simple thing. But Ewing didn't understand. Because Jilin couldn't be tired so quickly. And the Elven Island was very far away in his heart. How could he arrive so quickly? We're here. Ewing didn't say anything. He stood up, held Jilin's hand, and looked down. Sure enough, a lush island with dense forests appeared before his eyes. It seemed to have appeared out of thin air. When Ewing looked in this direction just now, he didn't see this island. What do we do now? Do we go in directly? Jilin asked. It was rare for Jilin to ask for his opinion, but Ewing didn't say anything after thinking for a long time. It was definitely not in line with etiquette to go to the island rashly. But if he wanted to knock on the door and ask for directions, where was the door? Fortunately, this situation didn't last long because the owner of the island came out. The Elven Queen, who was wearing a long white dress and a light veil, quietly appeared on the crown of a giant tree. Then, the giant tree began to grow crazily, until the Elven Queen's line of sight was level with Jilin's. Ewing looked at the legendary elves and thought that they were just like the legends. Apart from their slightly longer ears, they didn't look any different from humans. No, it wasn't that they didn't. The elves were much better looking than humans. Especially the Elven Queen. That flawless face was simply God's most beautiful and perfect creation. What was rare was that the Elven Queen exuded a graceful and noble aura that made people not dare to look at her directly. That was the unique aura of a truly noble person. This aura was similar to the third prince's, but it was much more obvious than the third prince's. Ewing looked at the Elven Queen in a daze. The more he looked, the more uncomfortable he felt. He felt as if he couldn't breathe. Shadow hurriedly turned his head and gasped for air. He even forgot to breathe just now. Ewing clutched his chest and thought that there really was such a thing as a beauty that could captivate fish and beasts. The fish forgot to flap its fins because the woman was too beautiful and sank into the water. The wild goose forgot to flap its wings because of the woman's stunning appearance and fell down. As for whether it died or not, no one knew. And Ewing actually forgot to breathe when he looked at the Elven Queen. Can you ever get rid of your bad habit of loving everyone you see? Finally, even Jilin felt a little embarrassed and couldn't help but ask. A real dragon? The Elven Queen looked at Jilin. What are you doing on the Elven Island? Elves and dragons are never on the same side. Oh. Jilin looked at the Elven Queen. Even he couldn't help but be amazed by the Elven Queen's beauty. I heard that there's a spring of life on the Elven Island. I have someone who is injured and I want to borrow it. Ridiculous. A dragon actually wants to borrow something from an elf. The Elven Queen shook her head. I advise you to leave quickly. This is not a place where you should be. There's no place that a dragon shouldn't go in the 3,000 worlds. Jilin spat out a bunch of flames from his mouth. This meant that he was angry. It was the first time he saw someone who spoke like this after seeing his real body. A dragon is still so arrogant. Are you insulting a dragon? Jilin's voice was like thunder. Insulting? Heh, in the mythological era, I've killed 2 dragons like you. Jilin had never heard such words. He was so angry that he couldn't control himself. What etiquette? What asking for help? Everything was forgotten. Dragon's breath. Jilin spat out dragon's breath and shot it toward the Elven Queen. Ewing was shocked. He didn't expect Jilin to use his trump card right off the bat. One could imagine that he was going crazy with anger. But in this way, the Elven Queen had no chance of survival. However, to Jilin and Ewing's surprise, the Elven Queen's expression didn't change at all. She raised her arm calmly. She said softly, "Mirror of the sky." A lake suddenly rose from the forest on the Elven Island. No, more accurately, it was the lake's surface. There wasn't a single ripple on the lake's surface. It was as flat as a mirror. As if it had traveled through time and space, the lake's surface blocked the Elven Queen before the dragon's breath. The dragon's breath disappeared quietly as if it had never appeared. Jilin looked at the Elven Queen. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was facing a great enemy. Chapter 223. Legend had it that there was a lake on the Elven Island. The surface of the lake was as flat as a mirror all year round. No matter how strong the wind was, there would not be a single ripple on it. Hidden Shadow looked at the surface of the lake and suddenly remembered this legend. So there really was such a lake. It turned out that it was a huge mirror. Before Hidden Shadow could react, a shadow covered his head. Hidden Shadow was shrouded in darkness. It was Jilin who had set up his wings in front of him. Hidden Shadow could see that the scales on Jilin's wings had all closed up. It became incomparably tight, without a single gap. The wings turned into 2 huge shields. Then, there was a violent impact. Hidden Shadow saw that Jilin's wings were actually trembling non-stop. After a long time, Jilin suddenly opened his wings, and Hidden Shadow saw the light of day again. What is this? Jilin looked at the Elven Queen and asked in a deep voice, "It can actually repel my dragon breath." "This is called the Mirror of the Sky," the Elven Queen said. "This is a gift from the god of space to us elves." As the Elven Queen spoke, the Mirror of the Sky began to shrink rapidly. Until the lake with a diameter of a few thousand meters turned into a piece of ice the size of a human eye. It flew into the Elven Queen's left eye. "Now, your dragon breath is completely useless." The Elven Queen looked completely confident and fearless. "All magical attacks that are seen by my left eye will be repelled." This was the confidence of the strongest creature in the world. Of course, Jilin did not believe it and casually threw a fireball at her. The fireball flew in front of the Elven Queen and suddenly disappeared. However, in the next moment, it suddenly appeared and flew back toward Jilin. Sure enough, this kind of attack is useless. Jilin thought to himself. After that, without any warning, the fireball disappeared with a puff sound. Even if it was repelled, it was still a fireball after all. A golden light flashed in Jilin's eyes. He instantly appeared in front of the Elven Queen and raised a finger. He stabbed out with a finger. His sharp fingernails shone with a soul-stirring cold light. It was as if it was the coldest and sharpest sword in the world. Since magic did not work, then close combat. This was a very simple principle. Jilin's finger was as fast as lightning. Ever since he followed Aisha into the world, he had never missed. No one was able to react in time before this finger. But the Elven Queen was not an ordinary person. If the trajectory of Crimson Lin's finger could be barely detected by shadow, then the Elven Queen's movements could not be detected by shadow at all. Hidden Shadow even thought that the Elven Queen. Her arms were originally hanging by her side, but she suddenly raised them horizontally and pulled the light veil draped over her back to block in front of her body. It was extremely abrupt, as if the important process of raising the arm had been omitted. But if that wasn't the case, he wouldn't have been able to block Jilin's finger. Yes, it was blocked. The Elven Queen's, Aunt's Elven Queen. If those humans who were stabbed to death by Jilin were to see such an unreasonable scene, they would surely die with grievances. Jilin looked at it. There was a faint mist flowing on this surface, but there were no threads. That's not a veil. It's a fog. Jilin remembered what Hidden Shadow had said to him. Legend had it that there was a thick fog on the Elven Island that did not dissipate all year round. Anyone who walked into it would get lost. Jilin saw that the Elven Island was lush and green. It was so green that it was intoxicating. There was no fog at all. He thought that it was an unreliable human legend, but it turned out that the Elven Queen had covered herself with the fog. Jilin did not believe it. He stabbed another 100 times in an instant. The hurricane formed made the sea turbulent. Huge waves shook the sky. The Elven Queen just looked at Jilin and let Jilin attack. I'll stand still and let the wind come from all directions. Jilin was so angry that he punched with all his strength. A powerful aura filled the world, and the wind and the sea moved with it. An even bigger red dragon shadow appeared behind Jilin. Then, he punched. That was himself. The wind and the clouds changed, overturning the sea. This power that could destroy the world was like a clay ox entering the sea when it came into contact with that thin layer of fog. It disappeared. Jilin felt like he was punching the air. Is this also a divine artifact? Jilin asked. The water god's gift is called flowing mist. The Elven Queen smiled. Unless you can hit the fog. Otherwise, don't waste your energy. Ewing was completely dumbfounded. He originally thought that Jilin was already unreasonable enough. He did not expect the Elven Queen to be even more unreasonable than Jilin. The Mirror of Sky could counter all magical attacks. Flowing Mist could block all close-range attacks. How could he fight? This was an innate invincible position. Was she still giving him a way out? Jilin, if you can't do it, then retreat. Think about it. Hidden Shadow said anxiously. However, Jilin ignored him. He looked at the Elven Queen and said, I can't hit you, and you can't beat me either. Naive dragon, the Elven Queen shook her head and laughed. Then, she raised her hands, and 2 rays of light suddenly lit up on the Elven Island. They rose from the Elven Island and fell into the Elven Queen's hands. It was a bow made entirely of tree branches. It emitted an extremely majestic aura. Jilin glanced at Hidden Shadow. Previously, he said that there was a sapling of the World Tree on the Elven Island. As for what the golden arrow was, he could not tell for now. The Elven Queen knocked the bow and pulled the arrow, and the power of the world was ready. It was the power of an entire small world. The universe array of the Middle Empire was just like this when it suppressed Jilin. Bang! A loud sound was heard. A golden arc of light flashed across the sky, and the Megalosaurus fell into the sea. Splash! However, in just a few seconds, Jilin broke out of the sea again. He floated in the sky and stared at the Elven Queen. His right arm had been pierced. Dragon blood that was countless times redder than human blood was slowly dripping down Jilin's arm. The red blood dripped onto the sea, and the seawater began to burn. The area below Jilin gradually turned into a sea of fire. The fire soared to the sky. Hidden Shadow hugged Jilin's finger and coughed out a few mouthfuls of saliva. He looked at Jilin with tears streaming down his face. "Why don't we stop fighting?" "No, it's the Dragon Clan's rule. All dragons that shed blood must pay with their lives." "Brother, it's too difficult for you to kill him now. You can't beat him." "You can't beat him." Only a few hours ago, Ewing would never have dreamed that he would actually be able to shout out these words to Jilin. "It's okay." Jilin did not deny it. "I still have a move." Jilin spread his wings, and the domain that belonged to him began to spread rapidly. The domain that originally only covered 5 meters in front of him gradually expanded to thousands of meters. Jilin believed that as long as his domain could encompass the Elven Queen, the final victor would still be himself. Dragon language magic, end of fire. It was the essence of all fire. It could burn all elements in the domain into fire elements. Everything would be burned into nothingness, including the Elven Queen and her divine weapons. The Elven Queen's eyes focused, and her golden green eyes became incomparably deep. The Elven Queen's domain quietly spread out. Rumble, there was nothing between Jilin and the Elven Queen. However, there were endless roars. Sometimes, there were flames burning out of thin air. Sometimes, there was a flash of lightning. The air froze, and the hurricane was like a knife. That was the aftermath of the two domains crushing each other and colliding. The world was divided into two halves. One was as violent as a raging fire, and all things were destroyed. The other was as warm as the spring breeze, full of vitality. Jilin let out a long roar, and the megalosaurus illusion that filled the world appeared again. Jilin had begun to borrow the power of the world. The Elven Queen's domain began to be forced back. "Humph." The Elven Queen snorted coldly, and then the entire Elven Island lit up. It turned into a myriad of colors. The light soared into the sky. Countless rays of light fell on the Elven Queen. Every ray of light was a divine weapon. The light faded, the Elven Queen revealed herself. Even Jilin was stunned. The Elven Queen, who was originally as otherworldly and unapproachable as an immortal, had suddenly become tacky. Her hands were full of 10 rings. A crown appeared on her head, and it was inlaid with all kinds of gemstones. There were no less than 3 or 4 head ornaments, and there were countless accessories on her body. Jade pendants, brooches, necklaces, bracelets, earrings. The Elven Queen, who was equipped with all the divine weapons, was really speechless. Even the tackiest rich human woman would not dress up like this. It was too messy, too messy. But it was very strong. A shadow also began to appear behind the Elven Queen. Not just one. The shadow behind Jilin was himself. What appeared behind the Elven Queen was the god of light, the god of space, the god of life, the goddess of earth, the god of sun, the god of fire, the god of water. Jilin glanced at the group of shadows. He did not need the shadow to say anything. He turned around and flew away. In human terms, this was, he fled in panic. Chapter 224. Jilin turned around and flew away. He did not even look back. Soon, it turned into a small red dot on the horizon and disappeared. The Elven Queen looked in the direction Jilin left. She did not chase after him. Instead, she just watched quietly. After a long while, the giant tree under the Elven Queen's feet began to shrink. Soon, it returned to its original state. The Elven Queen also landed on the ground. Under the tree, the elves were already standing. They looked at the Elven Queen with concern. How long had it been since the Elven Queen fought with someone? How long had it been since she was equipped with these artifacts? Was it 1,000 years? Or 2,000 years? They did not expect such a powerful creature to exist in this world. Naturally, the elves broke out in cold sweat. Fortunately, their queen won in the end. As usual. The Elven Queen slowly floated down from the giant tree toward the angel. It was like a dream. The artifacts on her were long gone. The Elven Queen changed back into her white dress. She looked noble and elegant. She looked magnificent. It was as if any accessories were superfluous to her. "Queen! Your Majesty!" The elves crowded around her with concern in their eyes. "I'm fine." The elven queen smiled and shook her head. Her smile was like the spring rain washing away the morning sun. In an instant, the world lost its color. "Your Majesty, how did that dragon come to the Elven Island? Could it be that our ancient restriction has lost its effect?" An elf asked. The elven queen shook her head slightly. "No, this is the dragon's talent. Legend has it that the ancestor of the dragon clan, the Black Dragon King, could travel from hell to the human world and bring endless black smoke to the world. He has more or less inherited some of his bloodline. Even if this red dragon is not as powerful as the Black Dragon King, it should have no problem passing through the boundary of our small world. Unfortunately, even the queen could not kill him on the spot." A female elf sighed regretfully. "Nonsense. The queen is kind-hearted and does not want to kill. That's why she shot his arm." "I see." The elven queen looked at her people and did not explain. Only she knew that she had aimed at the dragon's head when she shot that arrow, the bough of the world tree paired with the meteor arrow. It was her most powerful attack. Even if she attacked the enemy through one or two small worlds, she could kill the enemy in an instant. One could only imagine how fast that arrow was. But at such a close distance, at such a fast speed, the crimson dragon dodged. This meant that he had clearly seen the trajectory of the meteor arrow. In the Elven Queen's knowledge, if one wanted to see the trajectory of the meteor arrow clearly, even if it was a dragon with excellent eyesight, only the Golden Dragon tribe could do it. The Golden Dragon clan's golden eyes were said to be able to see the movement of light, but if he was from the Golden Dragon tribe, why would he be red? The Elven Queen looked at the sea not far away. A raging fire was still burning on the surface of the sea. The fire was so strong that it seemed to burn the sky. It was Jilin's blood. The bloodlines of the Golden Dragon tribe and the Fire Dragon tribe were both so pure and supreme. This dragon was somewhat unusual. Previously, the God of Light had said that the hero was about to arrive at the Elven Island. The God of Light had also said that the hero would obtain supreme power on the Elven Island and suppress the demonic dragon, but now, the demon dragon had arrived before the hero, but from the looks of it, even if the hero had 2 more holy swords and twice as much supreme power, he still wouldn't be a match for the demon dragon. Thinking of this, the Elven Queen smiled again. Interesting. Interesting, Divine Dragon Empire. In a coastal city in the east. Inside an unknown small restaurant, the furnishings in the restaurant were decorated in an ancient style. The primary colored wooden tables and chairs had long been polished by customers coming and going. It looked like an old restaurant with a flourishing business. The red-haired, golden-eyed Jilin, who had already transformed into a human, was sitting at a table with his arms crossed. He was deep in thought with his head lowered. Ewing was sitting directly opposite Jilin. This was the first time he had seen Jilin so deep and serious. He didn't know what Jilin was thinking. Therefore, he didn't dare to say anything. He even spent a lot of effort to suppress the words "you deserve it." As an old restaurant, the waiter quickly served the dishes that Ewing ordered. After the dishes were placed properly, the waiter bowed slightly and asked softly, "Sir, your dishes are all here. Would you like to order anything else?" Ewing politely said, "No need." The waiter bowed again and didn't say anything else. Then, he went to serve the other customers. Logically speaking, there shouldn't be anyone who would ask someone if they wanted to order something right after the dishes were served. No matter what, they should wait for someone to eat first. According to the words of the Middle Empire, this was called "after 3 rounds of wine, 5 flavors of food." However, Ewing didn't care about the waiter's question. It wasn't because Ewing had seen too many storms. Instead, it was because the dishes he ordered were worthy of being asked. Garlic lettuce. Stir-fried cabbage. Sesame paste cucumber. The only meat on the table was probably the plate of dry-fried small fish that the restaurant gave as a gift. The small fish, which were less than 2 knuckles long, were fried golden yellow. Their heads, intestines, fins, and gills were not removed. In the Divine Dragon Empire, as long as you knew a fisherman, you wouldn't need to spend money to eat this. Ewing stole a glance at Jilin. Jilin still had his head lowered and didn't say anything. He didn't react at all. Ewing was about to break out in a cold sweat. Among all the aspects of humans, what Jilin appreciated the most was humans' culinary skills. Although Jilin always said that it was the embodiment of humans' cruel nature and that it was a meaningless technique for humans to dispose of the corpses of other creatures. However, every time they went to eat roasted whole lamb, Jilin could still eat 5 to 6 roasted lambs alone. This was the result of Ewing and Staya stopping him. However, now that Ewing ordered a table of vegetarian dishes, Jilin didn't react at all. He even subconsciously picked up his chopsticks, picked up a piece of cabbage, and put it into his mouth. Then, he started chewing. Ewing widened his eyes and looked at Jilin in shock. Oh no! Damn it! A dragon eating vegetables. Bah! Jilin chewed 4 to 5 times. Suddenly, he tilted his head and spat on the ground. Jilin finally raised his head and glanced at Ewing. There was actually a hint of resentment in his eyes. Ewing's hair stood on end, and he shivered a few times. What is this? Jilin asked. Cabbage. What's cabbage? To humans, it's a dish. To you, it's a type of grass. Jilin didn't say anything about being a vegetarian for the first time in his life. He probably didn't care. He had been invincible since he was born. He had never been a match for him in the continent. However, he was defeated today. Ewing felt that he might not be able to understand this feeling even if he lived his whole life. So, he didn't hesitate to say what he wanted to say. How can the Elf Queen be so strong? Ewing said, I thought she was at most on the same level as Sing. One is the king of the orcs, and the other is the king of the elves. It sounds similar, but why is the difference so big? Jilin glanced at him and didn't say anything. He thought the same. However, there was one problem that they were both wrong about. The Elf Queen wasn't the king of the elves. She was the god of the elves. What should we do? Staya can't hold on for long. You can't beat her. Do you have a way to defeat her? Ewing said, but I say, what kind of grudge do you have with the Elf Queen? Why did they start fighting before I even finished my sentence? She doesn't look like such a violent person. Who said I can't beat her? Jilin blinked and looked at Ewing. Then this time, I'll go by myself next time. I won't bring you. What's the difference? Didn't I let her use one of my hands this time? Ewing was stunned for a moment. He wanted to refute, but he suddenly realized that what Jilin said made sense. This time, Jilin's battle with the Elf Queen was indeed holding him back the entire time. Speaking of which, he did let the Elf Queen use one of his hands, but why did he feel that something was wrong? Chapter 225. Shadow said that Jilin couldn't defeat the Elven Queen, and Jilin said that he was holding back one hand because of him. Shadow pondered for a long time before he finally understood. Holding back one hand? Even if you add another hand, you still can't defeat her. When you were fighting with the Elven Queen, I didn't see you use your arm. What's wrong? You're the second in the world, yet you can't defeat the first in the world. Are you trying to blame me? Shadow looked at Jilin with a smile, but he didn't dare to reveal his thoughts. Now that Jilin had just experienced his first defeat, anyone could tell that he was in a bad mood. I don't know if you've noticed anything strange. Shadow said after a long silence. What's strange? Jilin asked. The Elven Queen's feet never left that tree. Shadow looked at Jilin and said. So what? Jilin said. The Elven Queen's strength is extremely terrifying. She is said to be omnipotent in all kinds of human legends. She has the absolute upper hand when fighting with you. Do you think such a creature can't fly? Shadow said. Jilin just looked at Shadow quietly and didn't say anything because there was no need for him to say anything. The Elven Queen had the protection of the Wind God, so it was impossible that she couldn't fly. Shadow saw the golden light in Jilin's eyes and knew that he had understood something. Then he said, "If the Elven Queen can fly, then why did she bother to raise such a tall tree? Why did she just watch you fly away without chasing after you? After all, she looked like she hated you the moment she saw you. This doesn't make sense. There's only one possibility. She can't leave the Elven Island." "Can't leave the Elven Island," Jilin repeated silently. A cruel smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Shadow felt a chill run down his spine again. He could even guess what Jilin was thinking. It was nothing more than a harassment tactic. He would release a dragon's breath from afar, then turn around and run away. The Elven Queen would definitely panic. This way, it would only take a few days for Jilin to bring down the entire Elf Island. The Elven Queen could not take the initiative to attack and could only passively take a beating. He was already in an invincible position. But that wouldn't do. Staya can't hold on. Shadow pointed at the critical point and disrupted Jilin's tactical plan. Even if you can exhaust the Elven Queen to death, it will take at least 10 years. By then, Staya will be long dead. Then what should we do? Jilin's voice sounded a little angry. This was unacceptable, and that was unacceptable. When had the Dragon Clan ever suffered such humiliation? No problem. You have to let the Elven Queen know that she can't do anything to you. And then? Then send me to the Elven Island. I'll go negotiate with her. You? Yes, she won't be wary of me. If you're in danger, I can't save you. For the princess. Shadow imitated the action of the knight in the illustration of the Holy Grimoire of Light. He beat his chest with his right hand and said this seriously. The Holy Grimoire of Light here was not the divine weapon in Staya's hands. It was printed by the Church of Light themselves, and the missionary tools that were distributed all over the streets. There were words and pictures, vivid and easy to understand. You've changed a lot in this year. Jilin looked at Shadow, who was giving him advice, and could not help but sigh. Are you surprised? Shadow was a little proud. No, because being fickle and changeable is the nature of humans, Jilin said. If possible, I hope you can say that you've grown enough. Jilin stood up after he finished speaking. Let's go. Shadow blinked and could not follow Jilin's train of thought. Where are we going? To get back at her. Ewing slapped his forehead and sighed. He had seen Jilin learn the phrase "get back at her" from the third prince. It doesn't matter. Come with me to deal with something first, Shadow said. You still have something to do? Jilin asked. Of course. Shadow rolled his eyes. Someone nearly burned me to death earlier. As soon as Ewing finished speaking, he broke out in a cold sweat from the shock. He thought to himself, why did I talk to Jilin like that? Fortunately, Jilin did not mind. Or rather, he was too distracted to notice. Are you going to take revenge? Jilin asked. No, I'm going to see some things clearly. In the Red Dragon Church's secret camp, Lei Se was standing on the grass, looking at the beautiful amber sunset in the sky. The Red Dragon Church occupied auspicious Cloud City and used it as a starting point to plot against the entire Divine Dragon Empire. Since most of auspicious Cloud City was destroyed, he did not know if it was a success. Fortunately, the red-robed men he had sent out earlier had all returned safely. However, one person was missing. Shadow. Lei Se thought of this young man he had recruited into the church more than a year ago and could not help but sigh. When this young man first came, he was ordinary. However, after that incident, he revealed extraordinary knowledge, temperament, and means. In less than a year, he had entered the decision-making level of the Red Dragon Church and gained the recognition of the higher-ups. He took things for granted that ordinary people did not even dare to think about, just like the plan to kill the Dragon Knights this time. Just as Lei Se was thinking, a voice came from behind him. Lei Se's body stiffened, and he slowly turned his head, only to see two people appearing and disappearing mysteriously behind him. He didn't know when they had quietly stood behind him. Lei Sei's heart tightened. He called out softly, "Shadow." Then, Lei Sei saw Qilin standing beside Shadow. Red hair and golden eyes. Qilin didn't try to hide his appearance at all. That was how obvious his characteristics were. So much so that Reese recognized him immediately. Lei Sei's breathing quickened, and his pupils shrank to the size of needles. Seeing Lei Sei's violent reaction, Shadow finally confirmed his suspicions. "It's really you." Shadow gritted his teeth and said hatefully, "What's me?" Lei Sei looked at Shadow with an innocent and confused expression. "Stop pretending. You're a spy from the Divine Dragon Empire." Lei Sei's eyes narrowed. He looked around. There was no one around. Lei Sei took a deep breath and looked at Shadow. "Why do you say that? Don't accuse a good person. Only these few people knew about this plan in advance. You were the only one who was not in the fire. Just based on this? Weren't you the one who arranged for me to be outside? Why can't it be that someone accidentally leaked the news? The red-robed men won't," Shadow said with absolute certainty. "Also, you revealed the biggest flaw just now." "What flaw?" Ewing pointed at Qilin and said, "In front of us, you've always been expressionless, as if you're indifferent to the world. However, when you saw him just now, you looked like you were struck by lightning. This means that you know him. You know what he is." Lei Sei looked at Shadow and didn't say anything. Even if Shadow didn't say it, he knew how shocked he was just now. His appearance is still a top secret among the upper echelons of the Empire. If you're not a spy from the Empire, how would you know? Shadow was still aggressive. Also, if you're really from the Red Dragon sect, why would you react like this when you saw him? How did I react just now? Shock, fear, disbelief. Then, how should I react? Kneel, worship, and cry. Lei Sei blinked and was silent for a while. He looked at Shadow and then looked at Qilin. Finally, he smiled. He cupped his hands and bowed to Ewing. It was the standard etiquette of the Middle Empire. He said softly, "I've learned something." Hearing Lei Sei's words, Shadow sighed and closed his eyes. He didn't open them for a long time. The expression on his face was like a storm. His mood was constantly changing. It was as if he couldn't accept this fact. Lei Sei's words meant that he admitted it. Chapter 226. Humans were always like this. No matter how good the evidence was, they would not easily believe the people or things around them. Instead, they would wait for the other party to admit it personally before the dust would settle. It was as if they were afraid that they had wronged a good person. Of course, detectives and judicial personnel were an exception. To a certain extent, Reese was a judicial personnel, the Divine Dragon Empire's judicial personnel. Why? After a few breaths, Dark Shadow finally opened his eyes and asked with a complicated expression. Dark Shadow had known Reese for more than a year. Reese was the person who led Dark Shadow into the Divine Dragon Empire. For some reason, although they were not sworn friends, they could barely be considered friends. It was really just barely. Hence, Dark Shadow only had a complicated expression. Although Dark Shadow felt terrible about Reese's betrayal, he could still accept it. "What do you mean why?" Reese tilted his head, wondering why Dark Shadow would ask such a strange question. "As a spy of the Divine Dragon Empire, this is my mission." "I mean, why did you recruit me back then?" Dark Shadow asked with a gloomy expression. "Oh, you're asking about this." Reese came to a realization. The Red Dragon sect has countless spies in the Empire. They infiltrate the Empire's intelligence system like a sieve. However, it is very difficult for the Empire's spies to infiltrate the Red Dragon sect. I am isolated and helpless in the Red Dragon sect, so I want to find some helpers. Rather than taking the risk to recruit the Red Dragon sect members, I might as well find my own people to help me. How can it be difficult for the Empire's people to infiltrate the Red Dragon sect? Dark Shadow asked. The Red Dragon sect is an underground organization, after all. They need to hide themselves, so they are very strict with their new members. People with unknown backgrounds are not allowed to come into contact with the core area. However, the Empire does not, Reese said. Moreover, it is easier to hide yourself than to stand out. Although Reese's words were not very clear, Dark Shadow still understood. The Red Dragon sect members infiltrating the Empire were just making up the numbers, but the Empire's people coming to the Red Dragon sect were standing out. Are you saying that the Empire's people are of higher quality than the Red Dragon sect's people? Dark Shadow asked with raised brows. Although that's not what I meant, you're not wrong to understand it that way. Lacey shrugged. The spies of the Empire have all received special training from the Empire. They are all top talents. They are a bit conspicuous in the Red Dragon sect, which is mostly uneducated. Shadow narrowed his eyes and decided not to argue with Lacey about this. So, the helper you're looking for is me? That's right. Back then, I could tell that you weren't from the Divine Dragon Empire. Although I don't know much about him, I don't think he has anything to do with the Red Dragon sect. That's why I chose you, Lacey said. Just this? Of course not. At that time, you didn't know the villagers, but you helped them. It shows that you are a good person with a chivalrous heart. Furthermore, you were able to plan before taking action. You were able to observe the entire situation and then seize the opportunity to kill the leading soldier. Even among spies, this kind of temperament and methods would be considered top-notch. Your aptitude is not bad. Shadow nodded, agreeing with Lacey's words. Since you wanted me to join the Red Dragon sect because of this, why didn't you mention it to me? That's because not long after you joined the Red Dragon sect, I discovered something very strange about you. It was these things that made me give up on this idea. What's strange about me? Shadow frowned. That is, you have an unreasonably firm belief in that so-called Red Dragon god. What? Shadow's eyes widened in disbelief. Yes. You might not have realized it, but your belief in the Red Dragon god is outstanding even in the Red Dragon sect. Although you have an unwilling expression every time you kneel before the Red Dragon god's portrait, you are the only one who truly believes that the Red Dragon god exists. When others kneel to the Red Dragon god, they mostly treat the Red Dragon god as a spiritual symbol. They do not believe that there is a god in the world. The Red Dragon sect is like this, and so is the Church of Light, the top religion of the continent. There are also fanatics who truly believe in a god. Furthermore, the god lives in the sky above them, watching the world at all times. However, they do not believe that they will be able to see God in their lifetime. Humans believe in God, but there must be a distance between God and humans. This is the consensus of all human believers. However, you are different. Although you don't respect God on the surface, you believe in God the most. You give people the feeling that you really know the Red Dragon god and have seen him with your own eyes. Shadow thought to himself that he had not only seen him with his own eyes. He had even gone to the brothel with him, drank wine with him, killed people with him, helped the third prince pick up girls with him, helped the third prince rise to power with him, and even beat him up before. Shadow glanced at Jilin. Jilin was squatting at the side and looking at the ground with full concentration. He turned a deaf ear to their conversation. Shadow felt that the reason why Jilin was so focused on the ground was because there was an ant nest on the ground. Jilin was always so serious when looking at ant nests, just like how he observed humans. Of course, this could also be said the other way around. Jilin observed humans like he was observing ant nests. On the principle of equality, Jilin was very similar to the gods in the legends. Shadow suddenly thought. Then, he realized that he had been distracted for a long time. When he was around Jilin, he was always distracted. Perhaps it was because it was too safe that he relaxed. Shadow blinked hard and focused. He looked at Lacey and said, "Lacey, you are a spy in the Red Dragon sect." It was a narrow escape. Of course. Lacey nodded. The Red Dragon sect placed great importance on this mission, but because of your betrayal, they failed at the last step and almost got wiped out. Once people find out, the Red Dragon sect will not let you go. Shadow said. If you didn't suddenly want to attack Ruyan City, I wouldn't have acted so hastily and exposed such a big flaw to you, Lacey said. The ownership of the city is the Empire's bottom line. Not a single inch can be lost. It was the Red Dragon sect. No, you went too far. The city has never been the bottom line. People are. The Divine Dragon Empire is rotten from top to bottom. It is not worth you going through water and treading on fire. You saw with your own eyes how the soldiers wantonly slaughtered the old, weak, and children. I don't believe that you will remain indifferent. Such a country should not exist. As Shadow spoke, his eyes suddenly turned red. Narrow-minded. The Divine Dragon Empire has more than tens of millions of citizens. The Empire's territory is more than tens of thousands of kilometers. Lacey suddenly became agitated, as if someone had stepped on his sore spot. What you saw is just the tip of the iceberg. The Red Dragon sect's opinion is just a narrow generalization. What did you say? Shadow's voice trembled. The facts are all there. Are you still trying to quibble for the Divine Dragon Empire? The Empire has millions of soldiers. With so many soldiers, it is inevitable that there will be some differences. Is it strange that there will occasionally be one or two heartless scum? In this world, which empire dares to say that their army has never bullied the good? I admit that what you and I see is intolerable. However, in such a huge empire, this is just a small problem. What is there to be concerned about? What is there to be concerned about? Shadow's face was filled with disbelief. He had unsheathed his sword halfway. F***CKU. A small problem? Do you believe it yourself? If such a thing is really rare, how can the Red Dragon sect have so many believers? The Red Dragon sect would rather believe in a megalosaurus that can destroy the world than their empire. That is because the people are ignorant and have been bewitched by the evil sect. Bah! You beast! The villagers who risked their lives to protect you back then were also ignorant. Lacey fell silent because he really had nothing to say about this. I admit that the Empire does have problems, but it is far from being incurable, Lacey said after a moment of silence. I think you are the one who is incurable, Shadow said in a deep voice. Lacey sighed and did not pursue the matter. He said earnestly, you want to overthrow the Empire after seeing a few people die tragically. However, have you thought about it? There are people who died because of the Empire, but there are even more people who are protected by the Empire. Compared to the latter, the former is not worth mentioning. Shadow was suddenly stunned. A few lives were not worth mentioning. He suddenly understood one thing. The people of the Empire, represented by Lacey, did not treat ordinary people as living people at all. They were just numbers. It was a number that could be compared with other things in terms of benefits. Seeing that Shadow didn't say anything, Reese continued, think about it. If the Red Dragon sect really rose up, there would be a lot of casualties and countless people would be killed. Moreover, Comwind Pass will not be able to hold on. The consequences will be unimaginable. If you don't want more innocent people to die, then the Empire must not fall into chaos. Ha! Shadow could not help but laugh coldly. What kind of F***king bullshit logic was this? On one side, you treat human lives like grass and don't treat them as people. On the other hand, you ask people to consider the big picture and not touch you. Shadow had really given up now and did not want to say anything more. He pointed at Jilin, who was still looking at the ant nest at the side. It's okay. Don't worry. Even without the Divine Dragon Empire, the world will not fall into chaos because the Red Dragon sect has the Red Dragon God. If the oceanic races are really naturally afraid of dragons, our Red Dragon God, he can suppress Comwind Pass alone. Yu Ying's words were filled with lofty sentiments. This was unreasonable. Lacey remained silent because this time, he really had nothing to say. Qilin abruptly raised his head and looked at Yu Ying. What are you talking about, human? Chapter 227. Reese looked at Hidden Shadow in silence for a long time. Jilin finally stood up and looked at Hidden Shadow, asking, "What calm wind pass?" Hidden Shadow looked at Jilin and said maliciously, "Jilin, do you want to take over a human empire?" "What do I want that for?" Jilin asked with a frown. Reese could no longer endure the dangerous conversation between the two. He looked at Jilin and said, "I didn't expect you to actually exist, you know me?" Jilin raised his eyebrows. "Of course." Reese nodded and said, "A few years ago, my divine dragon empire suddenly received a piece of news. It was rumored that traces of dragons appeared in Gerda volcano, west of the Simai Empire. His Majesty, the Hero King, immediately gave the order to send the strongest knight of the time, Tice, to lead an army to investigate. However, after Knight Captain Thetis led the army into the volcano, it was like a clay ox entering the sea. There was no news. Since then, the Empire paid close attention to that volcano." Hidden Shadow nodded inwardly. He thought that Reese was much stronger than that city lord. He knew what to say and what not to say. When he said this, Lacey carefully avoided using the word Dragon Rider. Thetis was the Dragon Rider captain. The army he led was naturally the Dragon Rider squad, Thetis. When Jilin heard this name, he was stunned for a moment. This was the first human whose name he remembered. Even now, he still remembered it. This was because that human's manners and actions were really like the heroes in human stories. Unfortunately, he wasn't a hero. Jilin even wanted to spare his life because of this, but that human didn't cherish it. Instead, he chose to fight with his life on the line for a glowing stone. He said it was for the knight's glory and that you will never understand. "What a pity, you know Thetis?" Jilin asked. "You know him too?" Reese was astonished. He didn't expect this red dragon god to ask for his name before killing someone. Should he report it later? "What is the knight's glory?" Jilin asked without thinking. "Ah." Reese was taken aback by Jilin's sudden question and didn't know how to answer. Any human being who knew Jilin's true identity would inevitably feel nervous when talking to him. Although Lacey looked calm, the string in his heart had already been stretched taut. Seeing that he didn't answer, Jilin ignored him and turned to Ewing. "What are you trying to do?" "Hurry up. Should we kill him or not?" Okay. Shadow agreed. "Reese, let me ask you, why didn't the storyteller appear? Where did he go?" "He is not a citizen of the Divine Dragon Empire and is not under the Empire's jurisdiction. He can go wherever he wants." "Why are you asking this?" Reese appeared very natural when facing Shadow. Ewing sneered, "Do you think people from the Middle Empire can go wherever they want in the Divine Dragon Empire? You still don't know? Do you think I'm stupid? How do you know he's from the Middle Empire?" Reese asked. "His storytelling is too good," Ewing said. "Why did he come to Royan City?" "Why do you want Royan City?" Reese asked. Ewing looked at Reese and sighed. "It looks like I won't be able to get anything out of you. Although I am not talented, I am still a spy of the Empire. I carry the Empire's heavy responsibility." "Why is Brother Ewing looking down on me?" Reese asked. "All right." Ewing nodded. "Since that is the case, Ewing suddenly froze as if he was hesitating and struggling. Ewing stuttered for a long time and still didn't finish his sentence. Jilin grew impatient, and took a step forward. Reese immediately focused as if he was facing a great enemy. Although he knew he wasn't a match for the Red Dragon God, he didn't plan on giving up. Even if it was useless, he still had to fight. For the elusive miracle, and for the unwillingness to accept it. This was human. "Forget it!" Ewing suddenly shouted. "You leave, huh?" Reese and Jilin were both stunned. "He almost burned you to death," Jilin said strangely as he looked at Ewing. Reese also looked at Ewing. "Go and tell the Hero King that the Red Dragon sect wants Royan City. If you aren't afraid of death, feel free to send people to take it. We also want the Divine Dragon Empire." If he can't govern the empire well, we'll get someone else. We have the dragon god, so the divine dragon empire's name is not in vain. Rhys wasn't happy about escaping with his life. When he heard Yu Ying's arrogant words, he was already burning with anger. He said coldly, "Impudent. Get someone else? You think it's so easy? If it's someone else, do you think the divine dragon empire can instantly become peaceful? Who do you want to get? You? Of course I can't." Yu Ying knew his limits. Could it be him? Rhys's voice trembled as he thought of a terrifying possibility. "That's impossible," Yu Ying said decisively without even thinking. It was fine to worship Jilin as a god, but to make him the emperor? He was now the king of the beastmen. Had he ever cared about the beastmen? Then who is it? Rhys finally heaved a small sigh of relief. No matter what, Yu Ying wasn't crazy. He didn't want the red dragon god to become the emperor. "I don't know yet." "You don't know? You don't even know this, and you want to." Rhys was so shocked that he nearly laughed out loud. In troubled times, heroes are born. The times create heroes. We mortals only need to follow our hearts and do our best, following the will of heaven. When the time comes, someone will follow the will of heaven and become the emperor of the empire, Yu Ying said very seriously. Ridiculous. This is too ridiculous. Are you crazy? Rhys shouted. Is it ridiculous for the empire's soldiers to slaughter their own citizens in broad daylight? Yu Ying shouted. You should leave quickly, Yu Ying said with a wave of his hand. Do you understand the seriousness of this matter? Rhys did not move. I don't understand. I don't need to understand. Yu Ying said confidently. Then what do you understand? Right and wrong. Soldiers slaughtering citizens is wrong. How can there be only black and white in this world? Anyone who can say this is not a good person. Rhys was almost choked to death by Yu Ying's insightful words. You're too naive. Rhys sighed. A great man once said that great things always need a little naivety to push them forward, Yu Ying said. You guys haven't thought about anything yet, and you're about to do the biggest thing in the world. I asked you about your next plan and who the leader is. You told me to leave it to fate and that everything will work out when the time comes. Even if we're on different sides, I still have to say that this is obviously not possible. Why not? Yu Ying said, the future is unpredictable. No one can say for sure what will happen tomorrow, but we have to move forward. But you can't just walk blindly. No one dares to say that they can see the road ahead. Everyone is walking blindly. This is irresponsible to the citizens of the world. Ha! What kind of thing am I? How can I be responsible to the citizens of the world? Rhys looked at Yu Ying. For the first time, he realized that he had never seen the boy he picked up clearly. This boy is too contradictory. It's even to the point of being twisted. He has the kindest side of human beings. He can't bear to see the weak suffer. He will lend a helping hand when strange villagers are in trouble. At times, he dares to clamor to overthrow the empire that is unfair to the weak. So much so that when he first met this person, he called him young hero. He is hot-blooded, righteous, and chivalrous. However, he also seemed to have the darkest side of human beings. When he schemed against others, he was incomparably sinister. Over the past year, many heroes had died in the shadow of his shadow. He dared to attack Ruoyan City during high tide. Everyone's criticism fell on deaf ears. Dragon Knights can scheme whenever they want. They have no psychological burden at all. Attacking the city is too troublesome. Then they will set it on fire. He is cold, dangerous, and unscrupulous. He wants to uphold justice for the sake of dozens of weak people. But for this justice, he dares to abandon the world without a care for the world. Rhys suddenly felt that he was indeed unreasonable. Yu Ying's behavior was too contradictory. It was so contradictory that Rhys felt a chill in his heart. Jilin narrowed his eyes and took another step forward. This human is too annoying. He has already wasted a lot of my time. I still have to rush to the Elven Island to take revenge. Ewing reached out and grabbed Jilin's wrist. Jilin glanced at him and didn't dare to move. He was afraid that if he moved carelessly, he would bump into Ewing and die. Ewing is still counting on me to negotiate with the Elven Queen. In the end, this human's body is not as easy as a dragon's. If you don't leave now, you won't be able to leave, Ewing said. I know that spies of the Empire like you never take your life seriously. But are you sure you don't want to spread the news of the Red Dragon God's arrival in the Divine Dragon Empire? Rhys gave Ewing a deep look. He didn't say anything else and turned to leave. The Divine Dragon Empire was facing the threat of the Red Dragon God internally and the Rising Tide Sea Tribe externally. The news indeed needed to be spread as soon as possible. If I tell you to pass it to the Hero King, you must pass it on. Ewing shouted at Rhys's back. Jilin looked at Ying's back and felt a little surprised. Just now, he seemed to have seen Staya and Aisha's shadows appear behind Ewing at the same time. Moreover, they kept arguing, right is right, wrong is wrong. Such absolute words should only be said by someone as righteous and pure as Staya. And such an irresponsible way of doing things like "what does the world have to do with me" was obviously the trademark of a witch like Aisha. The reason why Ewing had such a contradictory feeling that shocked Rhys was that he had Staya's thoughts and also learned Aisha's behavior. Therefore, he could do something that neither of them could do. If it was Staya, she would probably have compromised when Rhys mentioned the thousands of citizens under the Empire's protection. If it was Aisha, she wouldn't even get involved in this. Doing something that required a lot of effort and didn't benefit her was not her style. But Ewing. Just as Jilin was looking at Ewing and thinking about humans, Ewing finally turned around and quickly let go of Jilin's wrist. Seeing that Jilin still didn't say a word, he asked, "What's wrong?" Jilin came back to his senses and said calmly, "Nothing, just don't touch me next time." "What's wrong?" "I'm afraid I'll kill you." "It's a pity." Chapter 228. Ewing blinked. He didn't understand what Jilin meant. What was a pity? Could it be that Jilin said it would be a pity if he died? Shadow could not help but feel delighted. However, after thinking about it, he could not smile. The reason was none other than that storyteller. That storyteller was the second strongest expert in Auspicious Cloud City. No matter how one looked at it, he should be an important figure. The matters of Auspicious Cloud City should be related to him. However, this time, Auspicious Cloud City experienced such a huge change, yet that storyteller was not there. This was very strange. Originally, if it were in the past, a Tier 6 expert would be worth Shadow's attention. However, now that Shadow had Jilin by his side, logically speaking, he should not have placed a Tier 6 expert in his eyes. Yet, Shadow was still so concerned. This was because he had two guesses about that storyteller's identity. First, that storyteller clearly came from the Middle Empire. However, why would someone from the Middle Empire come to such a remote city in the Divine Dragon Empire? There was nothing here. Second, this storyteller was a shadow guard from the Middle Empire. This meant that the Middle Empire's intelligence network had reached an insane level. There was actually a Tier 6 expert overseeing such a small city. If not, then there was only one possibility left. That storyteller also wanted to go to Elven Island. The information Shadow collected was not considered a secret in the Divine Dragon Empire. As long as one was willing, they could collect it. Since Shadow could sense that this was the beginning of the path to Elven Island, that storyteller might have found it as well. In that case, who could this storyteller be? Why would he want to go to Elven Island? Thinking up to this point, Shadow recalled a piece of news he once heard in the Middle Empire. "What are you standing there for?" Jilin patted Shadow's back when he saw Shadow's pensive expression. "Oh?" Shadow suddenly raised his head. "Oh, nothing." "Where are we going to Elven Island?" Jilin asked. "Big brother. I am a human." Shadow wailed. Jilin sized up Shadow strangely and said, "It is very obvious." However, don't try to claim that you are related to me. You are too shameless. Shadow was stunned. How am I shameless? People need to rest, Ewing said. The day after tomorrow, we'll go to the Elven Island. The next day, Ewing summoned all the red-robed men to discuss the various matters of entering Auspicious Cloud City. Now that Auspicious Cloud City had no city lord, the city lord token was in his hands, and the city's defenders had seen Jilin's divine dragon descending from the sky with their own eyes. They had no intention of defending the city. At this time, only 2 or 3 of them were left. Rue Cloud City could be considered to have been taken down. As expected, the Red Dragon sect easily entered Auspicious Cloud City. Then, he immediately painted the Divine Dragon Empire's Azure Divine Dragon banner red at the top of Auspicious Cloud City. This was Shadow's idea. Instead of making a new one, they might as well change the color of the helmet. Since they were both dragons, no one would be able to tell the difference. It was fine as long as the message was conveyed. In fact, Shadow did not want to be so perfunctory. However, none of them knew how to paint. Take a look. What do you think? Ewing looked at the red dragon flag fluttering in the wind and asked Jilin proudly. What the hell is this? It's really ugly. Jilin disdained the flag. This is you, Ewing said. Do you want to die? Jilin asked. Ewing did not say anything else. This was because he could clearly sense that Jilin was not satisfied with this flag. That night, Ewing and the Red Dragon sect's people discussed until the middle of the night. The moon was high in the sky. Ewing was not worried about Auspicious Cloud City. With Jilin as a deterrent, the Hero King would not dare to act rashly. For the time being, Auspicious Cloud City would be fine. Ewing would not let that traitor return for nothing. On the 3rd day, Ewing followed Jilin and quietly left the sea. Now, it was not easy for the Red Dragon sect's people to find out about Jilin's true identity. The Red Dragon God's descent was of great significance to the Red Dragon sect's people. Even Ewing could not predict how those people would react. It was very easy for it to lead to unexpected things. Hence, it was best not to act rashly. Since they had already walked down this path, with the dragon race's photographic memory, they would naturally be familiar with it. This time, it took less than half a day for Ewing to see the Elf Island from afar. This time, the Elven Island became hazy. The lush island was evenly shrouded in a thin layer of fog. Although the fog was light and thin, it was still enough to block the sight of humans. It was like a shy, gentle, and beautiful woman who came out after being called by thousands of people. She was still hugging a peepa to cover half of her face. It seemed that the Elf Queen did not wear this piece of cloth on her body today. Jilin thought silently. Be careful. Ewing said, if you accidentally kill any elf, there will be no room for discussion. No need to say more, Jilin said. After Jilin finished speaking, he opened his mouth wide. The endless wind and clouds in the world surged into his stomach like a giant whale swallowing the sea. Dragon breath. Jilin, who was very far away, released a dragon breath at the Elf Island. He didn't even say a word, and he didn't even come face to face with him. Instead, he directly attacked with his strongest killing move. This was a sneak attack. The surging dragon breath was faster than lightning. In the blink of an eye, it landed on the Elf Island. There was a loud bang. The fog-called flowing mist could block more than 100 stabs from Jilin. It could block Jilin's all-out punch that could shake heaven and earth. However, it could not block the dragon breath. Even Ewing could feel the Elf Island trembling from Jilin's palm. One could imagine how shocking the power of that dragon breath was. The Elf Island is indeed extraordinary. Just when Ewing was shocked by the dragon breath, Jilin seemed to be somewhat dissatisfied. What do you mean? Ewing asked. If it was a normal island of this size, it shouldn't be able to withstand my dragon breath, Jilin said. It's already amazing that this island didn't sink. Nonsense. Not only did this island have the invincible Elf Queen, but it also had more than 50 godly artifacts. How could this be ordinary? Ewing complained in his mind, but he didn't say anything. However, he immediately discovered a strange problem. After releasing the dragon breath, Jilin didn't move. He was still looking at the elf island. However, that wasn't the plan. Their plan was to run away as soon as they saw the elven island from afar. They wouldn't even look back. Why aren't you leaving? Ewing asked in a trembling voice. I've been targeted. I can't leave now, Jilin said. If I don't look at it from the front, I'm not confident that I can dodge it. Ewing's heart suddenly jumped. He instantly thought of the elf queen's bow and arrow. The bow made from the world tree sapling and the golden arrow. He had miscalculated. Ewing was extremely regretful. He didn't expect to be targeted here. Just as Ewing thought this, a golden light flashed in the sky. Before Ewing could get nervous, the meteor arrow had already arrived in front of Jilin. Ewing didn't even have time to move his eyes, and Jilin had already dodged the arrow. The first thing Jilin did was to turn and leave. Chapter 229. Ewing sat paralyzed in Jilin's palm, sweating profusely. He was still in shock and his entire body couldn't stop trembling. The Elven Queen's arrow just now was aimed at Jilin. There was no doubt about that. What Ewing suffered was the little bit exposed after being blocked by Jilin. But just this little bit made Ewing feel that he had already died once. Facing death directly, it was as if he had fallen into an ice cellar. His body and mind were frozen. Ewing only felt that facing the Elven Queen's arrow, it was as if the sky had collapsed, and he was standing under the sky with nowhere to run. There was no doubt that he would die. That was the power of a natural disaster. Jilin watched as Ewing kept trembling in his hand, and he was also frightened. Jilin knew that Ewing was frightened. This was normal. Facing the Elven Queen's arrow, no one would not be afraid. Not being afraid meant that they were not afraid of death. And being afraid of death was an instinct of humans as a living creature. Not to mention humans, even he was very frightened. So, being afraid was nothing, but he was afraid that Ewing would be scared to the point of peeing. Jilin once heard his father tell him a story. It was about a very powerful monkey who fought his way up to the heaven realm and turned the heaven realm upside down. Many gods couldn't do anything. In the end, a Buddha came and subdued the monkey. The Buddha trapped the monkey in his palm, and the monkey peed on the Buddha's palm. The Buddha only smiled slightly and didn't care at all. He only punished the monkey for disturbing the heaven realm and suppressed him under the mountain for 500 years. Such a punishment couldn't even be called a punishment for what the monkey did. This meant that the Buddha was really not angry. Jilin didn't understand, so he asked his father. His father said that this was because the Buddha's realm was profound. There was no joy, no anger, no sorrow, and no joy. Jilin felt that this realm was indeed profound. He couldn't even understand it, so he definitely couldn't reach it, so in order to prevent himself from burning Ewing to death in anger, Jilin quickly found a nearby island and landed. Jilin landed and turned into his human form. Naturally, Ewing also landed on the ground. "Why are you shaking?" Jilin asked in disgust when he saw that Shadow was still trembling. Then, Shadow ignored him. He turned his head around and looked around. Then, he staggered to his feet and walked to a big tree. He hugged the tree with both hands and slammed his head against the tree. It was as if he was possessed. Jilin narrowed his eyes as he watched this bizarre scene unfold before him. He understood that Shadow's spirit had been affected by the Elven Queen. His soul being shaken was also a thorny problem for the Dragon Clan. The souls of the Dragon Clan were innately powerful, and there was no spiritual attack in this world that could harm the Dragon Clan. Therefore, the Dragon Clan did not put much effort into the aspect of the soul. Their research in this area was not deep enough. Hence, Jilin did not have any good ideas about Shadow's current situation. They could only watch from the side, hoping that he wouldn't kill himself. As for whether or not he could recover, that would depend on the will of the heavens. The human soul was too weak. Jilin decided to spend half a day observing Shadow. If he still couldn't recover by himself in half a day, then there was no hope. Jilin made up his mind and sat down. He held his chin with one hand and looked at Shadow. Fortunately, Shadow didn't make Jilin wait for too long. After only half an hour, Shadow slowly woke up. The first thing he felt was that his head was wet. Shadow reached out and touched it. When he looked up, it was bright red. It was better if he didn't look. When he saw it, Shadow was shocked. Then, he felt a sharp pain coming from his head. Ewing screamed and pressed his forehead. He saw Jilin sitting not far away, looking at him as if he was an idiot. What happened to me? Shadow couldn't understand. How could he be injured so badly by Jilin's side? Your soul was attacked by that arrow, and your mind was damaged. You went crazy and slammed your head against the wall, Jilin said. I slammed my head against the wall? Shadow shouted. Yes, Jilin replied. Then you should have stopped me. Shadow was so angry that he almost cried. You won't die, Jilin said helplessly, and if you keep slamming your head against the wall, maybe you'll recover? See, isn't it fine now? What's fine? Shadow felt that his wound was getting more and more painful. For a moment, he didn't know whether it was because of anger or psychological effects. What should I do? Shadow covered his wound for a while. After finding that it was really fine, he was relieved. What do you mean? Jilin said. The Elf Queen could shoot you from so far away. What should I do? Shadow said angrily, I don't believe you can dodge such a powerful arrow every time. I really don't have confidence, Jilin admitted unexpectedly. This caused Ewing to be taken aback as well. It's not Jilin's character to be this honest. Then, do you have any ideas? Shadow asked. Then, should we go further away? Jilin said. Further away? How far away? Shadow asked. So far, Jilin said. This? You want to aim at the Elf Island from here? Shadow looked at Jilin in disbelief. Then, he looked in the direction of the Elf Island. There was no trace of the island. There was only seawater as far as the eye could see. Even if it was Jilin, Shadow didn't think that he could see the Elf Island from here. If they were to attack the Elf Island here, it would be a blind attack. Shadow felt that he must have thought wrong. Unfortunately, Jilin nodded, clearly telling him that he was not wrong. Can you hit it? Shadow asked. Then, he suddenly realized that he had asked a very stupid question. Since Jilin planned to attack here, he naturally had some confidence. Probably. Unexpectedly, Jilin gave an ambiguous answer. Jilin's attitude made Shadow even more uneasy. Then, can the Elf Queen aim at you? Shadow asked a crucial question. I don't think so. Jilin was a little uncertain. But it's worth a try. After all, the Elf Island is so big, and we're so small. It's obviously not on the same level of difficulty. We have the advantage. What us? What us? Brother, do you have to take me with you? Who are you and who are you? How could I dare to be mentioned in the same breath as you? Shadow couldn't help but complain in his heart. He didn't want to share the pain with Jilin at all. Then, he thought of another crucial question. Are you confident that you won't hurt the elf tribe here? Jilin paused. After a moment of silence, he slowly shook his head. If we fight here, my dragon breath can only hit an approximate range. Even if it can't hit the Elf Island, it's normal to hit the sea. Shadow nodded. He understood what Jilin meant. Since it was possible to hit the sea, it was also possible to hit the center of the Elf Island and kill a bunch of elves. Understood, Shadow said seriously. Don't waste your time. I'll go directly. Elf Island? What else? You'll die. There's no other way. You are really interesting. Chapter 230. Since Crimson Unicorn felt that Shadow was interesting, then it was probably true. Although it was the plan to have Jilin bomb the Elf Island first and then have Shadow come to negotiate, this was the plan in advance. However, Jilin did not expect that Shadow would still dare to go alone after such a huge mental attack. This was no longer a case of knowing that there was a tiger in the mountain, but still going to the tiger's mountain. If one had to describe it, it should be called bravery. It was impossible for Shadow to know what Jilin was thinking. If he did, he would have been speechless. Shadow was not as brave as Jilin thought. He was also afraid, and not just a little afraid. This was not Shadow's original intention. It was a choice he made after weighing the pros and cons. This was the only way left after eliminating countless unreliable and high-risk options. Although this method was not low in risk, leaving Stee to fend for herself was something that even the inhumane Crimson Lyn wouldn't do. Shadow felt that he couldn't do it either. Jilin wanted to shoot at the Elf Queen here. He was confident that he could attack the Elf Island. However, he was not sure if the Elf Queen could attack him. What if the Elf Queen could aim at Jilin from such a distance? What if Jilin could not block or dodge this time? Shadow did not think that he could survive. How big was this island? Other than hiding behind Jilin, where else could he hide? Therefore, Shadow thought that it was safer to go directly to the island. Jilin obviously would not go with him. He would not even get close to the Elf Island. Even if the Elf Queen was invincible, she would not let Jilin, a megalosaurus, into her home. Moreover, the Elven Queen looked at Crimson Lyn with deep hatred. Anyone with eyes could see that the Elf Queen had a grudge against the dragon race. After making up his mind, Shadow looked at the vast sea and began to worry about how he could get to the Elf Island. Jilin was strong, but Shadow did not believe that he could make a boat for himself on this deserted island. Ying's face was gloomy, but this couldn't escape Jilin's eyes. After Jilin learned of Shadow's concerns, he smiled disdainfully. Although he didn't know how to build a boat, he couldn't even build a wooden raft. But this was not a problem for him. Jilin walked to the seaside. His golden eyes shone brightly, and the surging dragon might filled the world. However, this time, the dragon's might was not as oppressive as it usually was. In the past, Jilin's aura seemed to want to press people to the ground and grind them into dust. However, it was different this time. This time, it was as if it wanted to tell everyone that there was a dragon here, but the problem was, there was no one else here besides him. The world was vast, but Shadow felt that there was nothing at all. From a human's point of view, there was nothing wrong with this. But from Jilin's point of view, this mistake was outrageous. Above the 9 heavens, countless birds and beasts spread their wings and soared high. Under the abyss, countless fishes and aquatic creatures swam freely. There were countless living beings in the world, but humans could always turn a blind eye to them. After a while, a huge fish broke through the surface of the water and floated up. Shadow had never seen such a huge fish before. He had lived in the Simi Empire since he was young, and he had never even seen the sea before. It could even spray water on its head. Shadow saw a pillar of water shoot up into the sky, and then a rainbow appeared in front of him. A rainbow! It's a miracle! What kind of fish is this? Is it a god's mount? It can actually summon a god. Shadow was stunned, and then he pointed at the rainbow and shouted excitedly. He had never seen a rainbow so close. After all, in the legends of the Simi Empire, it was a mark left behind by the gods. Even after following Crimson Lyn for so long, Shadow's bad habit of being a citizen of the sacred empire still hadn't changed. Jilin reached out and grabbed Shadow, then raised his hand and threw him onto the back of the whale. Shadow was shocked. He couldn't care less about the mythological beast, and hurriedly adjusted his body in the air. His body nimbly flipped, and he landed steadily on the whale's back. Shadow slowly straightened his body and steadied himself. Although the back of this big fish was extremely slippery, it was comparable to the moss-covered rocks in the Jade Spring in the Middle Empire's royal palace. Since Shadow could step on those rocks to practice his sword, he could naturally stand on this fish. "Let him send you to the Elf Island," Jilin said. "No matter how far the distance is, no matter how big the waves are, it won't be a problem for him." Shadow was a bit confused, and he didn't know why, but he felt that this was a bit unreliable. Does it know the way? Shadow asked. This is a vast ocean, and if I lose it again, don't worry. Jilin was too lazy to explain anything. There were too many things in this world that humans couldn't understand. Humans saw the ocean as water, the bottomless abyss, and endless darkness. Fish saw the ocean as roads everywhere, and there was nothing they couldn't reach. There was no way to explain it. I'm going back to the Red Dragon Palace now. If you're done here, I'll bring Staya to you. If you have anything else to say it now, Jilin suddenly said. Is he asking me to say my last words? Shadow complained in his mind, but he realized that he really did have something to say. If he was killed by the Elf Queen as soon as he got close to the Elf Island, he wouldn't be able to say anything, but suddenly asking a young human to say his last words, Shadow couldn't think of anything to say about himself. He could only talk about the things he hadn't done yet. Have you heard of the Red Dragon sect? Shadow asked. Jilin shook his head. It's a religion that worships you. Oh? Most of them are a group of pitiful people, and their lives are very difficult. So? Jilin didn't understand. If you want, help me take care of them. No, Jilin said straightforwardly. Ha, Shadow sneered, thinking that the people of the Red Dragon sect were really blind. Of all things to believe in, they had to believe in this thing. Then do me a small favor. If I die, help me protect the people in Ruoyan City for a while, so that they have a chance to hide. 3 days? Jilin didn't know how long Shadow meant by a while. Half a year. Shadow gritted his teeth. What could he do in 3 days? 7 days. Jilin said straightforwardly. 3 months. Don't go too far. Shadow was already anxious. Jilin didn't care at all, and slowly shook his head. Shadow actually wanted him to waste nearly 100 days on insignificant humans. He really didn't know what he was thinking. Half a month, no more. I'm about to die, and you're still bargaining with me? 1 month. Shadow said angrily. Jilin thought about it, and felt that Shadow's words were reasonable, so he finally nodded and said, okay. Shadow immediately let out a sigh of relief. There's one more thing. Shadow said. Why is there another? Jilin was obviously impatient. Do you know Calm Wind Pass? Ewing was ready to throw caution to the wind. He didn't even look at Jilin's darkened face as he spoke. I don't know. That is the human's #1 pass in the world. It has resisted the water race of the endless sea for countless years. It has protected countless life forms. Didn't you come here to inquire about the Elven Islands? What kind of messy news was this? What does this have to do with you? Jilin reprimanded Shadow for not doing his job properly for the past year. This has nothing to do with me. Shadow was also angry. However, it has a lot to do with you. I've never heard of it before. What does it have to do with me? Jilin asked, feeling strange. Several decades ago, the Divine Dragon Empire had more than 40 flying dragons. The Divine Dragon Empire relied on this force to defend Calm Wind Pass. However, one day, the Divine Dragon Empire suddenly sent the flying dragons out on a secret mission. In the end, 20 flying dragons went missing. Where did they go? Others don't know, but you don't know? Shadow's words were powerful and resonant. This might be the first time he spoke so boldly before Jilin. This stunned Jilin. Of course, he knew where those 20 flying dragons were. They were still flying around the Red Dragon Palace. However, Shadow was not done speaking. With only 20-odd flying dragons left, the Divine Dragon Empire immediately fell into a difficult situation. It was barely enough. However, a few days ago, 2 more flying dragons, that's enough. Jilin raised his hand to stop Shadow. I understand what you mean. However, is it wrong for one person to kill 20 thieves who broke into his home? Shadow could not say anything against Jilin's reasonable words. he also knew that this matter had nothing to do with Jilin. Furthermore, Jilin was not wrong. However, Shadow still wanted to try and persuade Jilin to keep an eye on Calm Wind Pass so that countless humans could survive. A few days ago, one more Dragon Knight died than Shadow expected. Originally, he thought that one would come at most. Unexpectedly, two came. Shadow sighed and wanted to give up. He did not have the leverage to persuade Jilin to do such a big thing. Sure. However, to Yu Ying's surprise, Jilin actually said such a thing. Shadow felt stunned. Then, he smiled and nodded heavily. With this, the world would be safe. Shadow also did not cause any trouble that would bring disaster to the world. Shadow could die with peace of mind. Then, Shadow left on the big fish. There was a sense of heroism, bleakness, and desolation, as if the wind was bleak and the water was cold. What Shadow did not know was that Jilin agreed to keep an eye on Rui Cloud City's people because of Shadow's face. However, Xiaochen only glanced at Calm Wind Pass because of Tiz. Heroes could always stir people's hearts. Even if the other party was not human. Chapter 231. Elven Island. The Elven Queen sat on the pure white elven throne, her beautiful eyebrows slightly furrowed. It was rare for her to be worried. A day ago, that dragon breath landed on the Elven Island without any warning, but she didn't notice it due to her carelessness. She didn't use the mirror of the sky to reflect it back in time, and the arrow she shot out in anger also missed. But fortunately, no one was injured. The Elven Queen sensed all her people nearby and sighed helplessly. The Elven Island was very big, much bigger than what one could see outside. There weren't many elves, but there were still 1,000 or 2,000 of them. Now that the Elven Queen gathered all her people here, under the protection of the Mirror of the Sky, it was very safe to lock them up. But there was a saying among humans, if you don't steal, you're afraid of being remembered. There was no such thing as guarding against thieves for 1,000 miles. Just as the Elven Queen was hesitating whether she should pay the price, break the contract of the gods, leave the Elven Island, and kill that hateful red dragon with an arrow. Suddenly, the Elven Queen blinked her eyes. At this time, Yu Ying had already entered the Elven Island on the whale, and any life that entered the Elven Island couldn't escape the Elven Queen's detection. Without any warning, the Elven Queen disappeared from the throne without a sound. She disappeared just like that. The elves nearby didn't care at all. This was very normal for the Elven Queen who had a spatial artifact, so it wasn't worth making a fuss about. But still, some elves couldn't help but be curious. Where did the queen go? On the surface of the sea near the Elven Island, a faint mist gently floated. Although the mist was faint, the wind on the sea didn't blow it away at all. Yu Ying stood on the back of the big fish, feeling uneasy. He couldn't blame Yu Ying for being scared. After all, he was going through the Elven Queen's artifact, and his life was in her hands. Yu Ying clearly judged the situation, and quickly pulled out 2 pieces of white cloth, one big and one small, from his waist. He bought this when he was in Ruoyan City, and this time he came to the Elven Island. He came prepared. The small piece of white cloth neatly wrapped around his forehead, blocking the scar on his head and his eyes. The shadow looked around through the white cloth, and the whole world became blurry. Yu Ying nodded in satisfaction. Then, a large piece of white cloth wrapped around the long sword at his waist. In this way, everyone could see that the sword could not be pulled out. Moreover, if he raised the sword, he could turn it into a white flag with a casual wave. At this point, all the preparations for Shadow's trip to the Elven Island had been completed. The only thing he wasn't sure about was whether the elves knew what the humans meant by waving the white flag. To prevent any accidents, Shadow stood on the back of the big fish and began to wave vigorously. He shouted, "Hey, is there someone? No, is there an elf? I am here to surrender. I have no enmity. Were there elves? Hey!" This was probably the first time in the history of mankind that someone had shouted so loudly about surrendering in such a soul-stirring and righteous manner. How can you make such a big fuss on the Elven Island? Suddenly, a voice answered Yu Ying's question. Her voice was crisp and clear, like the sound of nature. Yu Ying's heart tightened, and he stopped shouting. He had heard this voice before. Although he had only heard it once, it was deeply engraved in his mind. Because that was the voice of the Elven Queen. Yu Ying didn't expect that he would meet the Elven Queen so easily after coming to the Elven Island. Speaking of which, before this, the Elven Queen directly fought with Jilin, and Yu Ying didn't see any other elves. At this moment, a strange thought suddenly appeared in Yu Ying's mind. Could it be that the Elven Queen is the only elf on the Elven Island? Yu Ying looked around with his eyes covered by the white cloth, and he saw a blurry figure standing in front of him. Standing on the sparkling surface of the sea. The big fish suddenly stopped, and it almost threw Yu Ying into the water. I was still wondering how an outsider could come in from this path. So it's you again. The Elven Queen shook her head. How many humans have you brought to my Elven Island over the years? A loud wail cry sounded, and it hurt Yu Ying's ears. Yu Ying panicked. This fish had been fine all along, so why did it suddenly go crazy now? Why are you yelling at her? What if you make her angry? What if she kills all of us with a raise of her hand? Unexpectedly, although the Elven Queen was yelling at him, she didn't say anything to the big fish. She just smiled and said, "All right, I don't blame you. After all, you're a dragon. Although you're intelligent and powerful, you're still a beast. You have no choice but to obey the orders of the dragon race." Another wail cry sounded. "Let's go," the Elven Queen said. The big fish didn't dare to act rashly. It slowly sank and turned to leave. The dragon god ordered him to send people to the Elven Island, and he had done it. Fortunately, the Elven Queen was gentle and reasonable, and she didn't pursue the matter of him bringing people to the Elven Island without permission. This was the best outcome, as he didn't offend either side. He was sandwiched between the Elven Queen and the dragon god, and he was still able to escape unscathed. How fortunate. The big fish felt a lingering fear, and it quickly swam away. Yu Ying was left alone in the sea, shivering. The white flag that was made on the spot looked extremely miserable in the sea, like the legendary white trash. The Elven Queen hooked her finger, and Yu Ying flew out of the sea and floated in front of the Elven Queen. Yu Ying tried carefully, and sure enough, he couldn't even move a finger. How many years had it been since he had experienced the feeling of being pressured by a ghost? Yu Ying thought. Human? The Queen tilted her head and looked at him. Yu Ying wanted to speak, but he suddenly realized that he could move his mouth and tongue again. He opened his mouth and said, "Yes." "You're not an ordinary human," the Queen said. "Who are you? How did you make the red dragon send Xiao Bai to send you here?" Xiao Bai? Was she referring to that big fish? Yu Ying was a little dazed. At this moment, he suddenly remembered the crow that Aisha summoned with his hair. Aisha called him Xiao He. Could it be that there was no distinction between races in this world? Did all women name their animals in this style? I'm the human that was held in the hand of the Megalosaurus. Yu Ying forcibly pulled himself back from his thoughts and said seriously. He finally understood that the Elven Queen didn't remember who he was at all. He thought that the Elven Queen must have a photographic memory like Jilin and would definitely remember who he was, just like how he couldn't forget the Elven Queen after seeing her for the first time. But it turned out that it wasn't the case at all, but it was very understandable. When two high-level life forms of the same level were fighting to the death, who would have the time to look at the other person's dirty clothes? Suddenly, he felt the touch of solid ground. Yu Ying was stunned for a moment. He actually staggered and almost lost his balance. This was too abrupt. Yu Ying looked at the elven palace that was completely built with white stone and was shocked speechless. A moment ago, he was still in the sea, and now he was in the palace. Not even a little bit? What was this? Teleportation? But Aisha had to build a teleportation array when she teleported. While Yu Ying was still in shock, the Elven Queen had already spoken. State your intentions. Descendant of the dragon race, traitor of the human race. If your words don't satisfy me, then this will be the last time you bathe in the sun. Chapter 232. Shadow blinked. He felt that the Elven Queen was being too reserved. The surrounding elves were already in an uproar. They could not help but whisper among themselves. What was going on? The Queen went out for a trip, and no one knew where she went, but she actually brought back a living person. And what did the Queen say this person was? A descendant of the dragon race? A traitor of the human race? How many years had it been since the end of the mythological era that he had not heard of such heinous crimes? The Queen was really merciful. Why did the people of the dark faction say anything to him? They could have just killed him. This person is the human that the red dragon was holding. What? Shadow listened to those words and heaved a sigh of relief. It seemed that there were still people who remembered him. Your Majesty, I'm not a traitor of the human race. I'm also not a descendant of the dragon race. I'm just an ordinary human. I'm just a friend of Jilin. Ewing said, I took the liberty to come here today because I want to tell Her Majesty the Elf Queen that Jilin doesn't have any ill intentions and that he has no choice but to visit the Elf Island. No ill intentions? A male elf said, outsiders are not allowed to enter the elven territory. This is the god's contract. You broke the god's contract and said you have no ill intentions? Has the human race fallen to such a state? Have you forgotten the god's contract? Moreover, that's the dragon race. A pure-blooded dragon race. That's a core member of the dark faction. You, a human, are staying with the dragon race. If you're not a traitor, then what are you? God's contract? Dark faction? Shadow had never heard of that before. That elf probably did not know that elves did not even exist, let alone the god's contract. Humans were still doubting the existence of elves. The extent of the human race's depravity was beyond the elves' imagination. That dragon spent a lot of effort to subdue Whitey and sent you here. I don't think it's as simple as sending you to your death. What does he want? Tell me. The Elven Queen raised her hand to stop the elf and said to Shadow. Your Majesty, Jilin would like to ask you to save someone, Ewing said bluntly. Save someone? Even the invincible Elven Queen could not help but doubt her own ears at this moment. Did she hear wrongly? To save someone. Shadow nodded and said in a deep voice. Is it a human? The Elven Queen was experienced and knowledgeable. She immediately determined that this was a problem unique to humans. As early as the mythological era, when humans and other races conversed, they would habitually refer to other races as humans. This had even led to many misunderstandings. Just in case, the Elven Queen asked again. It's a person. A human? It's a human. Is he also a traitor of the human race? A descendant of a dragon? This, isn't it? Who is that? Princess of the Simai Empire, Saintess of the Church of Light, Staya. The Saint of Light? Saint of the Light. The Elven Queen understood. She nodded slightly and said, Human, you're here to die. Is this a provocation from the dragon tribe? I didn't expect that after so many years, the dragon race is still so idiotic. This. Shadow was dumbfounded. Some of the elves around him had already knocked their arrows. An intimidating aura locked onto dim Shadow. It seemed that the other elves felt that a weak and dirty human like Shadow was not worthy of dirtying the hands of their queen. Although this was the truth, humans often did not think this way. Why does Your Majesty say this? Shadow hurriedly asked. Because what you said is ridiculous to the extreme. Why would the dragon race save people? They eat people. The Elven Queen's reason was so strong that Shadow did not know how to refute it. In a panic, he actually said, Dragons don't eat people anymore. Huh? All the elves were stunned. Their first reaction was, nonsense. Ridiculous. What a waste of time. Hurry up and kill him. Dragons don't eat people. Are they vegetarians? For a moment, the Elven Palace seemed to be in an uproar. This time, even the Elven Queen was serious. She looked at Shadow and asked seriously, You said that dragons don't eat people? No. Shadow said. Why? Shadow tilted his head and thought for a while. Then, he stuttered and said, because, he said that they don't taste good, not good. The Elven Queen frowned. Humans were the main characters of the world. They were born with extremely high spiritual intelligence. They were blessed by the gods and had countless divine lights in their bodies. To the dragon race of the Dark faction, they were the most delicious food. How could they not taste good? Tell me the cause and effect in detail. The Elven Queen looked at Shadow and said seriously. This time, Shadow was in a dilemma. He thought to himself, which part of this is the cause, and which part of this is the consequence? Shadow thought about it again. What if he said something that angered the Elven Queen? Wouldn't he be beheaded immediately? If that was the case, this might be the last thing he said. If that was the case, then he would try to make it as long as possible. Therefore, Shadow started from when Jilin fell from the sky and kidnapped the Saint of the Light in the sacred city. He continued until when Staya used God's descent and fought with Jilin. Although Shadow had not experienced what happened before, Aisha had told him a few times in private. It was enough for him to tell the Elven Queen. Human, is what you said true? The Elven Queen listened quietly. Then, she stood up and asked Shadow, word by word. Shadow only felt a huge pressure. It was as if Mount Tai was pressing down on his mind. At that moment, Shadow's consciousness was on the verge of collapse. Under such circumstances, he could not be distracted and tell any lies. Shadow faced the Elven Queen through the white cloth. At this moment, it was as if he had to use all of his strength just to say a word. Every word is true. Shadow struggled to say. Very good. The Elven Queen said. Then, with a thought, she removed the pressure that was as heavy as the mountains and seas. Yu Ying's heart lightened. With such a huge impact, his mind naturally couldn't bear it. He immediately rolled his eyes and fell to the ground, unconscious. The surrounding elves looked at each other. Finally, an elf walked to Shadow's side, turned his head, and opened his eyelids. The elf clearly heaved a sigh of relief. Fortunately, the situation hadn't reached the point where the queen had to personally kill someone. Although he was relieved, the other elves did not relax because of him. The atmosphere was still tense. Because the Elven Queen, who was standing in front of the throne, still had a solemn expression. How many years had it been? How many years had it been since the queen had such an expression, Your Majesty? The elf squatted beside Shadow, looked up at the queen, and said worriedly. The queen did not care about him. Instead, she was silent for a while and slowly said 4 words. The Chaos Era, Your Majesty, what did you say? The Chaos Era is about to begin. You're tuning into the Mythic Realms YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.